One of the many great things about video games is the freedom they grant players to explore and make the adventure their own. But there's the flip side, that some games are designed so meticulously that they're actually playing the player themselves in ways they can't even begin to comprehend. These 10 video games all saw developers pulling off mind-boggling feats of trickery and deception, often to ensure the smoothest and most entertaining experience possible, or perhaps just to cover their own ass. I'm Jess from WhatCulture, and here are 10 genius ways video game developers outsmarted you. Number 10. Game secretly restarts your Xbox during loading screens. The Elder Scrolls III: Morrowind. Morrowind may be fondly recalled as one of the greatest RPGs of its era, but those who played it on the original Xbox are just as likely to remember the game for its famously lengthy loading times. But the loading screens were actually a devious smokescreen by Bethesda, who used the opportunity to literally reboot your Xbox console without you even knowing, in order to clear its memory cache, as the game's director Todd Howard confessed in a recent interview. He said, "There's been great tricks that Xbox taught us. My favorite one in Morrowind is, if you're running low on memory, you can reboot the original Xbox and the user can't tell. You can throw like a screen up. When Morrowind loads, sometimes you get a very long load. That's us rebooting the Xbox. That was like a Hail Mary." Given that this trick went completely undetected for almost an entire 20 years and is surely preferable to players having to literally reboot the console themselves and load the game all the way back up, it clearly paid off dividends. Number 9. Secret level select menu triggered by a bug. Sonic 3D Blast. In the case of Sonic 3D Blast, developers Traveller's Tales pulled a fast one over not only the players but also Sega themselves. Though you can enter a cheat code to access the game's secret level select menu, you may also encounter it during gameplay in a seemingly random fashion. This is because the lead programmer of the Mega Drive version of the game, John Burton, coded it to throw up the level select menu whenever players encountered a game-breaking bug. This allowed players to resume from any level they wished, while also disguising the fact that the game just effectively crashed from both players and, perhaps more importantly, Sega's certification team. In more recent years, players also noticed that they could trigger the level select menu by wiggling the game cartridge around, which is actually due to the connection between the cartridge and the console being broken, which the Mega Drive would of course register as a bug and immediately transport players to the level select screen. In a word, genius. Number 8. First-time players get a damage buff online to encourage play. Gears of War. Tricking players within the carefully controlled environment of a single-player game is one thing, but multiplayer is an entirely different beast. But Epic Games implemented a subtle yet brilliant psychological trick to keep players glued to their Xbox while playing Gears of War multiplayer. Though the game is known for being relatively punishing for new players, the devs opted to remedy this by giving first-timers a damage buff and other sly advantages for their first few kills in their first game. The series lead designer Lee Perry said, "In Gears, found out 90% of first-time players don't play a second multiplayer match if they don't get a kill. That first game's important, so we started you off with some major advantages, like additional damage bonuses that tapered off with your first few kills." So if that first game of Gears made you feel empowered and badass, it wasn't so much a result of skill or even luck, as it was a carefully designed illusion to draw you in and stop you from rage quitting in record time. Number 7. It invented dynamic resolution to create true HD visuals. Wipeout HD. Though it's been a staple of PC gaming since its inception, dynamic resolutions have only recently been introduced into the console sphere, or so we all thought. However, the technique whereby a game alters its resolution on the fly to produce a continually smooth frame rate without the player noticing anything goes all the way back to 2008's Wipeout HD. The hit racer made the lofty promise that it would output at true 1080p, a rarity given that most PS3 games were either 720p or 1080i. And though Wipeout HD was widely praised for its jaw-dropping visual fidelity, developer Studio Liverpool actually tricked players and critics alike by employing dynamic resolution scaling in order to maintain a buttery smooth 60 FPS, even when the action was especially frantic. Considering how convincing a trick it was, it's much easier to respect the studio for their deception rather than begrudge them for it. Number 6. The endless stairs are caused by teleporting the player. Super Mario 64. Any Super Mario 64 fan worth their salt will remember the infamous endless stairs in Princess Peach's castle, where players without 70 power stars will find themselves endlessly running up a seemingly infinite flight of stairs without actually getting anywhere. But rather than design an actual never-ending staircase, Nintendo's dev team came up with an altogether more ingenious solution, by simply building the one staircase and coding the stairs to trap the player in a teleport loop between a few steps. The loop is seamless enough as to be totally imperceptible to players, such that for 25 years many have tried to discover sneaky ways to reach the top, such as using the famed backwards long jump glitch to basically brute force their way past the loop. Number 5. Small tables are actually buried shelves. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Bethesda strikes again with another totally radical feat of deception in the Elder Scrolls series, albeit a considerably more innocuous one than literally restarting your console. In Skyrim, any of the small tables you come across in the game world are actually shelves which have been half buried in the geometry of the map. Because in the time-consuming world of AAA game dev, any minute you can save is absolutely worth it. Though there's been some debate about the efficiency of burying objects underground, given that it still exists within the game world and will therefore present a cost to the system memory, it's certainly a creative way to recycle existing assets. For 99.999% of players, this went unnoticed, even after hundreds or even thousands of hours of play, and yet it's so deliciously elegantly simple as the best tricks so often are. Number 4. The entire world is slanted to create the top-down view. The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds. A Link Between Worlds is 2013's spiritual successor to 1999's SNES classic The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and in remaining consistent with its aesthetic, it's similarly presented from a top-down perspective, albeit in 3D. But because a purely top-down viewpoint in 3D wouldn't allow players to glean any of the finer details of the characters or environments, Nintendo were forced to actually make the entire game world slanted. Every item and character in the game was tilted backwards by 45 degrees, as players can momentarily observe for themselves by rotating the camera to the side when transforming into Link's 2D painting form. It's something almost all of us take totally for granted, and yet without such a tectonic geometric shift, A Link Between Worlds and games like it would look completely flat and featureless from above. Number 3. Sound effects are tied to NPCs. Half-Life. Sound design in video games is a whole other mess, as is perhaps evidenced no better than by Valve's groundbreaking FPS Half-Life, where the team had to get more than a little creative to make everything work. Only players who pay the utmost attention will notice that NPCs such as Barney move their mouths whenever they press buttons on doors and other objects, and this is because the resulting sound effects are actually tied to them. Due to unspecified technical issues, Valve were forced to attach these contextual sounds to the character activating the object rather than the object itself, resulting in the game's automated lip sync script also playing out and their mouth moving along with the sound effect. It's easily missed if you don't happen to be looking intently at the NPCs as they're doing mundane things, and so it's yet another feat of masterful corner-cutting game dev from the fine folks at Valve. Number 2. You will trip over if the world hasn't loaded yet. Jak and Daxter: The Precursor Legacy. It's become increasingly common over the years for games with sprawling open worlds to only render portions of the environment within the player's sightline, as was demonstrated so impressively in Horizon Zero Dawn. But back in 2001, years before Horizon was even a twinkle in Guerrilla Games' eye, the first entry into the hit platformer franchise Jak and Daxter employed a frankly awards-worthy means of buying itself more time to load in assets. Basically, if the game was struggling to keep up and build the game world around you, it would force Jak and Daxter to trip over, wresting control away from the player for around 2 seconds while it finished loading. Though most players will only come across this occasionally, speedrunners can find themselves becoming frequently unstuck by it, given that it's effectively a safeguard to stop players from running ahead of the game itself. As far as creative solutions to nagging technical issues go though, this is masterful, and why would we expect anything less from Naughty Dog? Number 1. Rested XP encourages players to play for short bursts. World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft's Rested XP system grants players an XP boost while they're offline, effectively incentivizing players to play for shorter bursts and log back in later, where they'll receive 200% of their otherwise unrested XP. But Rested XP actually came about in the first place because Blizzard's prototypical scaled XP system was largely rejected by playtesters. Originally, the game was designed to gradually lower the amount of experience players received from 200% to 100% over a play session, to encourage playing for shorter periods of time. Play long enough and your XP would bottom out, incentivizing players to log out before then and return later. But players loathed it, and so designer Rob Pardo came up with the idea of making everything in the game effectively take twice as much XP to achieve, while Rested XP would grant 200% XP gains until it ran out, and return the player to 100%. The idea is fundamentally the same as before, that you're encouraged to exploit the bigger XP gains and log out when they're gone, but now framed through the logical lens of Rested XP, it seemed infinitely more acceptable to players. Now that's some incredible meddling with human psychology right there.
Now, while you'd reasonably expect developers to want players to easily access every feature in their game, for whatever reason they sometimes opt to downplay some of their niftier, more clever mechanics, or perhaps not even mention them at all. And these 10 video game mechanics are effectively hidden in their own games. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 genius hidden mechanics in video games. Number 10. Coyote Time gives you extra time to jump, Celeste and many others. Now, Celeste certainly isn't the first platformer to include this mechanic, though given that it happens to be one of the most brutally difficult recent games in its genre, it's especially noteworthy that it makes good use of it. Now, Coyote Time is a technique in games development where players are given an extra fraction of a second after leaving a platform to leap before gravity kicks in and drops them down, named after Wile E. Coyote's gravity-defying tendencies, of course. This mechanic is employed to basically limit player frustration during difficult platforming, but given that Celeste is all about being hard as nails, many simply assumed it didn't include such forgiving mechanics. And yet the game's creator confirmed in a fascinating Twitter thread that Coyote Time is indeed part of Celeste's platforming framework, and that you're granted a few frames of forgiveness after leaving a ledge to make your jump. Now, knowing this admittedly doesn't really make Celeste any more infuriatingly difficult, but still, at least it's there. Number 9. Serrated and Righteous Damage Modifiers, Bloodborne. From Software's action RPGs are some of the most intricately designed games of their kind, such that the enthusiastic fanbase relishes digging as deep into the guts and meta of the game as possible. Now, for the most part, Bloodborne basically just leaves players to it to figure out things for themselves, typically through trial and error, and what I really mean by that is a lot of dying. But there is one significant mechanic, however, that is entirely internalized and never even hinted at within the game world itself: the secret serrated and righteous damage modifiers. Weapons like the Saw Cleaver and the Church Pick are serrated and will grant the player 20% additional damage against heavily transformed monsters, while righteous weapons such as the Church Pick and Holy Moonlight Sword will deal varying extra damage to enemies of the Healing Church. Given that the weapons themselves don't indicate these secret abilities, you'll need to figure that out for yourself, or far more likely use the player wiki and save yourself a lot of time. Considering Bloodborne's high level of challenge, it's absolutely worth exploiting every possible advantage while out in the field, especially those that From Software hides right underneath your bloody nose. Number 8. IVs and EVs are secret Pokemon stat values, Pokemon. Even long-time Pokemon fans might be dismayed by EVs and IVs, which are the secret values which determine the strength of your Pokemon. Now, IVs are individual values, hidden attributes applied to each Pokemon when they're caught, which determines how high or low their base stats can go, typically between 0 and 31. IVs can't ever be seen in-game and must be manually calculated using the Pokemon's known stats, or more likely an online calculator designed to do the job for you. By breeding 2 Pokemon with high IVs for a given trait, you can effectively engineer the creation of immensely powerful Pokemon. Basically, IVs are the Pokemon version of genes. EVs, meanwhile, are effort values, hidden stats which can be obtained by defeating certain Pokemon in battle. Winning a battle will earn you an EV point, and 4 EV points will grant you 1 extra stat point, while you can also feed your Pokemon vitamins to further boost their EVs, so in total you can obtain about 510 EV points for a Pokemon. It might sound like a bit of a headache, but for anyone sufficiently invested in the Pokemon meta or just keen to get into the competitive scene, IVs and EVs are an absolutely vital part of the process. Number 7. Dodge Offset lets you keep the combos going, Bayonetta. Bayonetta is one of the most expressive and enjoyable character action games out there, but one of its most important mechanics is easily missed by most players, and that is the dodge offset. Though it is referenced in both the game's instruction manual and an in-game menu, there's no outright tutorial or unmissable explanation for it, which is shocking considering how radically it changes combat. Dodge offset is a means through which the player can continue chaining an attack combo together while also dodging clear of enemy attacks. Basically, if you're midway through a combo and need to dodge, simply keep the last button hit in your combo held down while pressing the dodge button, then release the hit button once you've dodged clear, and then hit the next button in your combo and it will continue as though the dodge had never interrupted it. Dodge offset is extremely tricky to master, but it also makes Bayonetta considerably more enjoyable to play. If you're planning on conquering the game on higher difficulties, this is basically a necessary skill. It's also included in many other Platinum Games titles, where again, it's generally not even explained up front for some baffling reason. Number 6. Playing in New Game Plus, Fez. Fez is one of the most ingenious platformers of the last decade, but did you know that it contains a secret mechanic that allows protagonist Gomez to fly? Yep. Once you beat the game and start New Game Plus, you'll be able to take flight after pressing up 4 times and then the jump button once. When videos of Gomez first flying materialized online, word spread that it was some sort of glitch or just a custom mod, but indeed, it's an official mechanic surreptitiously hidden within the game. Naturally, the power of flight is an incredibly useful one for anyone who's already beaten the game once, to navigate the world at a massive advantage without the pesky limitations of gravity. A select few players found the feature by total lucky accident, but let's be honest, most everyone else just read about it online. Number 5. Advanced melee combat makes the game way more fun. Resident Evil 6. Now, Resident Evil 6 is a deeply flawed game for many reasons, but it does deserve a measure of credit for including a surprisingly comprehensive array of melee combat options, even if the game does a frankly terrible job of actually explaining them to the player. Now, many players understandably jumped into Resident Evil 6 and tried to play it like the previous 2 action-centric games, yet many wound up dying with far greater frequency than expected because this isn't really the way Capcom designed RE6 to be played. The game's tutorial offers just the bare minimum of information about the myriad ways that you can approach enemies, and how smoothly skilled players can string together melee, gunplay, counters, dives, slides, and so on if they invest the time to learn about it. But Capcom did such a terrible job of explaining the advanced combat options in-game that it fell to fans to write their own tutorials, though ultimately many players just likely brute forced their way through it the old-fashioned way while being none the wiser. Though the game is still largely deserving of its wildly mixed reviews and mediocre reception, its deceptively deep combat deserved to have a far brighter spotlight shone on it, because it remains one of the most ambitious aspects of the entire series. Number 4. Jump cancelling makes you unstoppable. Devil May Cry. Jump cancelling has appeared in every single Devil May Cry game and proved popular enough with fans that it was introduced as an upfront mechanic in its own right from Devil May Cry 4 onwards, but before that, players basically just went about figuring it out for themselves. Jump cancelling allows players to interrupt their stylish juggling attacks mid-air by leaping off an enemy at the precise moment that they make contact, allowing players to keep a combo going for frankly hilarious amounts of time. This can naturally be incredibly useful for dealing with large swathes of enemies and also bosses. Like Bayonetta's dodge offset, jump cancelling requires an enormous amount of practice to perfect the timing and can't be used with equal effectiveness for all moves in your arsenal. However, the immense combat opportunities it opens up are well worth it for committed players. Number 3. Reserves help you maintain a longer boost. Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled. Much like the main platformer franchise, Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled is a surprisingly complex and challenging game, filled with difficult-to-master mechanics, some of which aren't even explicitly relayed to the player at all. The key to victory lies in mastering the game's turbo-boosting mechanic, where you can chain skills together to achieve different-colored boost, leading up to the super-fast blue fire boost, affectionately called the Ultra Sacred Fire by fans. Maintaining the Ultra Sacred Fire boost is incredibly difficult, and reliant on how well you're able to get to grips with the hidden reserves mechanic. You're able to build up invisible boost reserves by chaining together power slide turbos, hang time turbos, turbo pads, and turbo power-ups, which for skilled enough players will basically allow them to keep the Ultra Sacred Fire boost going potentially indefinitely. This is an absolutely behind the curtain yet a crucial technique to learn if you're serious about competitive online play. Number 2. Affection points determine your character interactions. Final Fantasy. Since the release of the original Final Fantasy VII, several games in the series have included point-based relationship dynamics, whereby your future interactions with party members are determined by how you deal with them up until that point. Final Fantasy VII, for instance, picked who Cloud took on a date to the Gold Saucer between Aerith, Tifa, Yuffie, and Barret, depending on the player's dialogue choices and actions prior. There are invisible numerical values applied to each character, which are weighted towards Aerith and against Barret, making them the most and least likely candidates respectively. Speaking favourably to Tifa numerous times early in the game, however, can result in her quickly overtaking things. Similarly, Final Fantasy VII Remake will show players a different cutscene later in the game depending on which characters they deferred to throughout, and whether or not they completed certain side quests. And then there's Final Fantasy X, which also applies an invisible numerical value to your party members. Unlike Final Fantasy VII, however, all party members are given equal weighting to begin with, and their standing can be affected by how often the player heals, protects, or even attacks them in battle, and also which character they speak to first during certain sequences. Whichever character scores the highest total will be the one that Tidus, even though it should totally be Tidus, talks to during select dynamic cutscenes, as well as the character being the one to throw the Blitzball during his overdrive move Blitz Ace. While it is in no way a vital mechanic, it nevertheless is a pretty neat one that Square Enix put so much time into, but they're never told the player about. And number 1, Crystal Flash can heal Samus in a pinch. Super Metroid. Super Metroid contains a number of hidden mechanics that the game doesn't tell you about or only vaguely hints at. Players who hang around on the game's menu screen, for example, will learn that the rejuvenating Crystal Flash ability exists, but are never told how to pull it off. Only when Nintendo Power Magazine spilled the beans was anyone able to execute the move, which for players low on health and with an empty reserve tank, would allow them to detonate the power bomb in their possession and transfer the resulting explosive energy into a health boost. Crystal Flash is executed by entering the Morph Ball form and then detonating a power bomb. At the same time, players must hold down L and R plus down and the fire button, which if done right will result in Samus being lifted into the air amid a white orb of brilliant white light, refilling her health and reserves. Though the ability is certainly risky to use during intense combat as you're left wildly exposed to enemy attacks, the life-giving potential, well, it speaks for itself.
Given the amount of money that's in online gaming these days, it's little surprise that developers funnel considerable resources into combating cheaters. Beyond the obvious solution of simply bringing the mighty ban hammer down upon mischievous players, these games came up with more novel means of dealing with hackers, bots, and other nefarious ne'er-do-wells. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 genius ways video games fought cheaters. Number 10. Making modded cards explode upon entry. Grand Theft Auto Online. Trust Rockstar Games to come up with a totally hilarious way to flip the bird at cheating players. The Duke O'Death is an armoured muscle car in Grand Theft Auto 5, which originally was only available to those who upgraded from the PS3 and Xbox 360 versions of the game to PS4 and Xbox One copies. And more to the point, it could only be officially used in the single-player portion, not Grand Theft Auto Online. However, in 2015, players found a way to hack the Duke O'Death into GTA Online, but rather than merely ban offending players, Rockstar came up with an altogether more emphatic way to give them a telling off. Basically, the developers patched the game to ensure that the Duke O'Death would instantly explode the moment that any player set foot in it, killing them instantly. On the one hand, it was an ironclad way to stop players from circumventing a restriction, and on the other, it sent a rather firm yet playful message to offending players that cheating wouldn't be tolerated. Number 9. Banning cheaters until they post an apology video. H1Z1. Battle Royale game H1Z1 encountered a serious problem with cheaters shortly after launching in early 2015, with over 25,000 players being banned in May of that year. At the same time, developer Daybreak Game Company's president John Smedley announced an outrageous initiative to discourage cheating, promising to only restore banned accounts if the culprits posted apology videos on YouTube citing remorse for their actions. Smedley revealed that he'd been sent many apologetic emails from affected players, but felt that this wasn't good enough, requesting a more intimate, personal video lamentation instead, which he could then retweet. Smedley added that he encouraged those who were apologising to direct their regrets to other gamers rather than the developers themselves, as he felt it was players who were truly suffering from most of their actions. Ultimately, the limited time offer came and went without many players taking Smedley up on it, which, while a bit of a shame, isn't really remotely surprising. Number 8. Hijacking their character in-game. Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 evidently doesn't suffer cheaters lightly and made one hell of an example out of one especially prolific rascal back in 2015. A player character by the name of JT Darkside reportedly spent around 3 weeks wreaking havoc throughout the massive multiplayer online gaming world, attacking other players and teleporting around the map with impunity. Players reported Darkside to developer AreaNet in swaths, and after a surprisingly lengthy period of inaction, they finally decided to act. But AreaNet didn't stop at merely banning the cheating player, they bodied him so thoroughly that it sent a triple stamped message to anybody else planning to ruin other players' fun with cheating ways. Guild Wars 2 security lead Chris Cleary eventually took to the game's official forums to reveal that not only had Darkside been banned, he'd been jettisoned from the game in the most comically theatrical manner possible. Cleary posted a video of him logging into Darkside's account, stripping his character naked, flinging him to his death, and then deleting both characters registered on his account. Needless to say, sympathy for Darkside was few and far between, even if this was an especially performative act of quite literally parading a cheater's humiliated corpse through the digital streets. Number 7. Sending Mr. Rossetti to hassle save scummers. Animal Crossing. The Animal Crossing series allows players to cheat by quitting out of the game without saving, moving the system clock forward to the next day, and returning, letting them access replenished store stocks, amongst other things. However, players who quit the game without saving their progress will, upon reloading, be met by the supremely angry mole man, Mr. Rossetti, whose central preoccupation is to pester players who attempt to exploit their way to riches and success. At first, Rossetti will be polite but firm, but the more that you abuse the reset exploit, the more insistent and annoyed he'll get. His actions vary in severity and weirdness across games in the series. He might simply talk you to death for a few minutes, or force you to type responses back to him such as "forgive me" and "Rossetti rules." The piece de resistance, though, is threatening to delete your entire save game as punishment for your abuses, yet after apparently doing so, it thankfully ends up being a fake out intended to scare the player straight. Number 6. Watermarking their health bar. Outriders. Online-only co-op action at Outriders may not have set the world on fire when it released in 2018, but developers People Can Fly did come up with a neat way to deter cheaters after encountering a higher than expected volume of them during the game's demo period. The devs issued a warning prior to the game's release that they could tell who was cheating while playing the demo, and vowed to permanently brand any re-offending players in the game proper with a discreet but visible spiderweb watermark on their HUD's health bar, forever outing them as a bad egg. Given that Outriders isn't a PvP game, cheating perhaps wasn't as egregious as it could have been, but all the same, the hope was that permanently altering a player's HUD robbed them of the glory of posting screen grabs of their in-game accomplishments. Considering that players are only likely to cheat at Outriders for vanity reasons, to boast to others how far ahead they are, this was a pretty inventive way to invalidate that and make the cheaters consider the ultimate futility of their actions. Number 5. The Bovine Defense Force Initiative, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Within days of The Witcher 3's release, players discovered an exploit which allowed them to quickly amass crowns by killing cows in White Orchard Village, looting their hides, meditating to trigger a respawn, and then repeating the process all over again. CD Projekt Red quickly caught wind of players sneakily enriching themselves though, and a few weeks later released a patch which gave those taking advantage of the exploit a rather nasty surprise indeed. The patch resulted in players who killed 6 cows being suddenly faced with a mighty level 27 Chort spawning in front of them, an extremely powerful cow-like monster who could easily make short work of unprepared players. In the original version of the patch, Chorts would continually keep spawning even if the player managed to kill one, with the developers dubbing it the Bovine Defense Force Initiative, which is a fantastic band name by the way. Hilariously, some players realised that if they were strong enough to kill the Chorts, this could help them farm crowns even faster than with the cow exploit, and so CD Projekt Red later altered it to only spawn a single Chort. Number 4. Modding bots to only attack cheaters. Team Fortress 2. Team Fortress 2 has always had a substantial problem with cheaters, though that reached a fever pitch in 2020 when Valve's official servers became flooded with bots using cheats to disrupt genuine gameplay. These were typically programmed to use aim bots, spam the in-game chat, vote to kick legit players out, and even cause the server to lag. Naturally, this pissed off players who, dissatisfied with Valve's apparent inability to cope with tidal waves of bots, took matters into their own hands. Later that year, players resorted to inserting their own cheat bots into Team Team Fortress 2 servers, yet these were only programmed to target malevolent cheat bots and leave genuine players alone. It was a magical case of fighting fire with fire, of effectively creating Terminator-like bots to take down other nuisance bots. While many understandably decried Valve's ongoing failure to address the problem infrastructurally, this was nevertheless a spectacularly smart idea on the part of enterprising, frustrated players. Number 3, letting other players publicly execute them. EVE Online. If there's one thing you can't deny about EVE Online, it's that those who play it take it super seriously and, above all else, won't abide the effort of anyone treating it like a joke. Developers CCP Games also haven't taken lightly any attempts to undermine their meticulously constructed space sim, and in 2018 even organised a public execution of cheating players. One of the most common methods of cheating involves using a bot to farm in-game currency all day long, providing offenders with a substantial advantage over honest players who have to, leave the computer to work, eat, exercise, and actually deal with other human beings. Between this and the potential for mass botting to destabilise the game's fragile economy, CCP typically offers cheaters a warning before banning their account on a second offence. But 5 years ago, a series of spaceships owned by cheating players were teleported into neutral space, and players en masse were invited to show up to give them one hell of a shellacking. And boy, that they did. By the end of the massacre, more than 150 players had assembled to destroy the fleet of ships trotted out by CCP staffers, and when the ritual was repeated a week later, more than 700 strong showed up to obliterate a cheater's Titan, one of the most powerful ships in the game. Glorious. Number 2, creating invisible enemies to detect aimbots. Call of Duty. The Call of Duty franchise has certainly come up with its fair share of clever methods for dealing with cheaters, but Activision has truly outdone themselves with their latest gambit. The publisher recently announced an update to their Ricochet anti-cheat software, which governs all contemporary Call of Duty games. This adds a new anti-cheat mechanic which introduces hallucinations to multiplayer games. Fake invisible enemies cloned from actual players in the game. While in no way affecting play for regular gamers, these digital phantoms would instantly trigger cheating mechanisms like aimbot, in turn outing cheaters without any room for doubt whatsoever. As traps to catch cheaters go, that's incredibly smart and creative. Simply banning cheaters is one thing, but completely obliterating the very foundation of their cheating is another, to ensure that they can't help but reveal their dirty little secrets. Number 1, banishing cheaters to their own playlist. Fall Guys. Containment is an interesting solution for developers to prevent cheaters from ruining the game for honest players, yet without banning offenders outright and losing their custom. And so Fall Guys developers Mediatonic once introduced a Cheater Island, a secret playlist for cheaters to compete against one another, free to out-cheat their opponents in the pursuit of that ever-precious crown. According to Mediatonic, at first, Cheater Island lacked enough concurrent players to consistently fill up matches, but over time their pool of cheaters became surprisingly large, and so the secret playlist was open in earnest. However, the developer ultimately decided that there were too many cheaters to tolerate, and so decided to swiftly close their experiment down, instead handing out blanket bans to offending players, with the game subsequently adopting Epic Games' more robust anti-cheat measures. Mediatonic's own Twitter account said of the matter, "Our cheat detection system was good, but we hadn't expected so many players, and we had no idea the lengths that some would go to cheat."
Now, in the vast majority of video games, when you try to leave the open world or go outside the area that developers have created, one of two things can happen. Either you hit an invisible wall or you die instantly. But you know what? That doesn't always have to be the case. Because today we're looking at some really inspired examples of how designers kept you in the box. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 8 genius ways video games don't let you escape. Number 8. A MIME, Family Guy video game. During the early 2000s and the PlayStation 2 era of video games, an abundance of licensed games overflowed the industry. Whether it was a movie, cartoon, or anime, all major IPs were getting a rather mediocre game or two, and among them was Family Guy video game. This game is just what you expect it to be. It is nothing more or less. The combat is generic, the stealth missions are, well, utterly broken, and while some of the jokes are funny, most of them fail to capture the cartoon's humor. With all of this said, while most of the game lacks quality, it does have a pretty clever way of keeping you in it. If you try to exit the game's central area during its beat-em-up section, you'll hit an invisible wall, but not just any wall, one that is created by a mime. When you reach this point, Peter Griffin performs one of his iconic quips, and you can't help but laugh at the sheer cleverness and humor that this game has implemented, if only in this one example. Family Guy video game may not be anything special, but the developers were able to genuinely capture the cartoon's humor at this moment. Number 7. Zombie Dog Attack, Resident Evil. There are few openings in classic video games as iconic as the first cutscene from the original Resident Evil. The atmosphere is intense, the FMV cutscenes look surprisingly polished, but also B-movie, it's very weird, and the whole thing perfectly amps you up for what's to come. After you experience this, you might be so terrified of the zombies, dark corridors, and inevitable jump scares found in the mansion that you might try to exit through the front door and pretend that nothing has happened. But this is a big mistake. If you're unlucky enough to try this, you'll quickly find yourself bombarded by one of the zombie dogs that drove you into the mansion. Not only is this jump scare absolutely terrifying, I mean, look at that CGI, woof, that has not aged well, but you then have to fight and kill the canine, consuming precious ammo and resources in the process. And if you do this again, the same thing will happen. It's a brilliant way of keeping you inside the game and punishing you for trying to escape the horror that's within the mansion. You need to delve deeper into this horrible place, and there won't be an easy way to get out of it. Number 6. Shark Attack: Crysis. There are many games that you see on this list that will find creative ways of killing you instantly for trying to leave the open world, but Crysis was one of the first to implement this way of keeping you in. If you take a boat and try to explore the outer region of the classic first-person shooter, you might see a little fin come out of the water reminiscent of a 70s Spielberg movie. I think it's called E.T.? At first you pay it no mind, but then you see it again, and this time, it's definitely coming for you. You try and run away to see if maybe you can make it back into the game's world, but it's already over as the shark has destroyed your ship, and now there is no escape. Once the shark reaches you, it will kill you instantly as expected and leave you in a highly dire state that will likely make sure you never try to do this again. Now, there's definitely other games since Crysis with more terrifying and creative monsters to keep you inside, but this is the first one to do it, and so is the most memorable in all of gaming, arguably. Number 5. Infinity: Minecraft. Have you ever heard of inflation theory in cosmology? It's a scientific theory that states that the atoms that comprise our universe multiply amongst themselves infinitely, making sure that our world technically never ends. This means that no matter what we do, we'll never be able to escape our universe, just like we'll never be able to escape Minecraft. When you start playing the iconic indie game and explore its intricate and fascinatingly randomly generated worlds, you might ask yourself just how far you can go. How much of this world can you influence, and for how long? The answer is not much, or at least it was in the older console versions of the game, as the planet you are on eventually hits an invisible wall that prevents you from going further. However, in the modern versions of Minecraft, the game will go on forever. Compared to other games, the developers didn't bother to create an illusion of a beyond or some outside world. Instead, they just make sure to keep you in it by making it impossible to ever leave it. Number 4. The Great Plateau: The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. When you start Breath of the Wild for the first time, you'll be greeted with one of the most breathtaking openings in a video game, exiting your slumber as you witness the vastness of Hyrule for the first time. However, you won't be getting out of here anytime soon. At first, a simple cliff preventing you from exploring the central area of the game seems basic and not that especially clever, but there's more going on than you might realize. By presenting this seemingly impossible way to get out, players will start to come up with whatever way possible to reach the other side without attaining the paraglider, introducing experimentation and outside-the-box thinking, which is what Zelda is all about. Clever speedrunners and Zelda players have even discovered ways to make it past this point by using a variety of tricks and techniques learned over the years to get over that cliff, only they then hit a trigger that takes them back to where they were. It might be disappointing that you can't skip the Great Plateau entirely, but this genius move blocking you from the rest of the world encouraged players to keep playing more than anything else. Number 3. Slender Man: Slender: The Arrival. Now, Slender Man is not exactly somebody you want to encounter. He's tall, terrifying, and will quickly kill you in a jump scare, especially if you're playing his games. Instead of searching for the 8 pages you need to beat the game though, you might have this great idea of just simply leaving and letting Slender figure things out himself, only to find a variety of fences blocking your way. However, if you're good at platforming, you might be able to jump through and make it to the other side to reach an area that the developers didn't intend for you to find. Afterwards, you can explore to your heart's content, knowing that Slender Man can't get to you here, right? Well, that is until an ominous message appears on the screen, saying that not even a bug in the game can save you from him. Slender Man will then kill you before sending you to the game over screen. Like some of the best indie horrors around, Slender Man proves that there's no natural way to escape, and all you can do is knuckle down and confront him. Number 2. Blood Red Sea: Sea of Thieves. There are many terrifying monsters that developers have put in games to kill you the moment that you reach the world border, but Sea of Thieves has a more subtle way of doing things. If you try to explore beyond what the developers created, you'll see that the earth and sea will slowly turn blood red. You have more than enough time to turn back if you so wish, but if you for some reason continue to move forward, your ship will start to sink, and you along with it, and it won't take long after that for you to drown as well. When going through the experience, at all times, you'll be expecting a monster or some creature to appear to deal the finishing blow, letting your imagination run wild as you try to figure out what to do, only for nothing to happen, and you die in a rather anticlimactic manner. However, this subtle aspect makes the Blood Red Sea more terrifying than it would be otherwise, keeping you inside the game while also ensuring you'll never want to explore outside ever again. And number 1, Ghost Leviathan, Subnautica. When you crash land on the alien planet that makes up the world of Subnautica, you'll quickly realize that exploring the deep sea is, well, utterly terrifying. You'll have no idea what you'll find down there. There might be some innocent aquatic life just trying to get through the day, but at the same time, you might find a giant monster that definitely wants to kill you. Regardless, if you're brave enough to journey the ocean and start exploring outside the world the developers created, prepare to meet something that definitely doesn't want you to live. As everything gets darker, the computer will ask you if traveling further is worth it. Of course, you can ignore this and continue, to then find a massive creature called the Ghost Leviathan. This thing is pure nightmare fuel, but also it is immortal, meaning that if you encounter it, there's not much you can do other than await your rather certain death. We've seen how monsters kill you the moment you go out of bounds before in games, but none are as terrifying as this.
Time travel is tricky. It's impossible in real life, but possible in video games, although not every game gets it right. These titles, though, handle time travel in a logical and consistent way, but also use it to make the best and most creative levels you'll ever play. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 genius time travel levels in video games. Number 10, A Crack in the Slab, Dishonored 2. The Dishonored series loves to explore interesting concepts with the help of your character's supernatural abilities. The first game features abilities like teleportation and freezing time, and its sequel kicks things up a notch with an entire level designed around the premise of time travel. The mission, A Crack in the Slab, takes your character to the abandoned manor of a missing baron, Aramis Stilton, in order to investigate the circumstances behind his mysterious disappearance. To help you with your investigation, Dishonored 2 provides you with a special device called the Timepiece, which allows you to instantly travel back and forth between the past and the present, giving you the opportunity to explore the manor both when it was still filled with life and extravagance and when it's become a dilapidated ruin. The time travel mechanic is done seamlessly and plays an important role in the level's design. You can use the changes between the past and present to your advantage to slip past guards and gain access to areas that were locked or destroyed in the other time period. The mission is an absolute blast, which is why it's a bit of a shame the timepiece doesn't make a reappearance. Number 9, Chapter 5, Shadow of Memories. Shadow of Memories is a bizarre 2001 mystery game in which you play as a German man named Ika Kusch, traveling through time in order to prevent his own murder. The premise itself is already intriguing, but it's the way in which the game's mechanics play with it that makes this one so worth playing. You see, when you travel through time, the time in the present doesn't stop, but rather runs parallel to the time in whatever period you're in. This means you need to change your fate within a time limit, which is easier said than done, as the more you mess with the timeline, the more consequences it has for the present, and you might have to travel even further back in order to fix it. The perfect example of how chaotic this mechanic is the 5th chapter of the game. By that point, Ike has changed so many things, he needs to travel between 3 different time periods, going back as far as the 1580s, while keeping track of 3 separate clocks and time limits. It's extremely stressful, chaotic, and unlike anything else you'll ever experience in gaming. In other words, it's absolutely worth checking out. Number 8, Anju and Cafe Mission, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Time travel is a surprisingly common trope in the Legend of Zelda franchise. Out of all games in the series, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask handles it in the most interesting and in-depth manner, by trapping the player in a Groundhog Day scenario where they keep repeating the same 3 days before the end of the world. You might think the constant repetition of a 3-day schedule would get boring, but it's actually the most satisfying part of Majora's Mask. Each day has plenty of side quests that require you to use your knowledge of the future in order to alter their course for the better. The most complicated, ambiguous, and engaging of these stories is the Kafei and Anju storyline, which spans across the entire 3-day period and takes multiple changes in the timeline to complete. The whole side quest is too long to describe here and would involve a bunch of spoilers, but the gist of it is you try to reunite the two lovers after one of them was cursed to look like a child. The side quest requires a lot of time travel and spying on people, but it's part of the reason why helping these two is so entertaining and satisfying. Number 7, The Apartment, 12 minutes. As the title might suggest, 12 minutes is a short interactive experience that takes place entirely inside a single level that consists of a set of rooms where, in 12 minutes, a bloody and unmitigatable disaster will occur. Well, except things aren't really so doomed because every time the 12 minutes pass, the game loops back to the beginning of the level and lets you alter the course of the events preceding the disaster so you can prevent it, or kill one of the characters earlier. You can really do all sorts of things here. For this reason, although the game has only one level that lasts less than a quarter of an hour, in order to finish it, you need at least 6 to 8 hours during which you collect clues, experiment with different outcomes, and slowly unravel a disturbing secret that your character's family has been hiding for years. And I mean disturbing. The game is genius at executing the time loop trope, as it doesn't just use it for puzzles and gameplay. The loop can also impact the narrative and the tone of the game, making everything feel more disturbing the more you keep resetting the timeline. 12 minutes is worth checking out, although it's important to keep in mind the title is highly misleading. Number 6, Opening Level, Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger is not only a classic JRPG, it's also one of the earliest titles that toyed with the idea of time travel. The entire game revolves around the main cast of characters traveling through time to prevent the end of the world, and despite Chrono Trigger being something of a precursor for time travel games, the idea is executed perfectly. The best example of why that's the case is Chrono Trigger's intro level, where the game familiarizes you with its mechanics as well as the concept of time travel. Nearly every single NPC in the sequence has some kind of issue that needs to be resolved, but without knowing what's going to happen, helping them can be tricky. This is where your friend Luca and her latest invention, the time machine, come in. You help Luca test out the machine, and as soon as you do, you get to re-experience your whole day, except now you're equipped with memories of what's going to happen. Helping the troubled NPCs with your past knowledge is incredibly satisfying, and does an amazing job of introducing you to Chrono Trigger's time travel capabilities, which only get deeper and crazier as the game goes on. But honestly, if the whole game was just about using time travel to fix minor inconveniences for your friends, no one would probably complain. In fact, I want to play that game. Number 5, Bond's Casino, Sexy Brutale. Sexy Brutale is a murder mystery game taking place in a luxury casino that's stuck in a time loop. You play as Lafciato Boone, a preacher who can use a special pocket watch to rewind time so that he can solve the 7 different murders happening in the casino before the victims are killed. It's hard to divide the game into specific sections, as it's relatively short and each part of the story intertwines with the others, but the main location of the game, the Lucas Bond's Casino, features plenty of creative uses of your time-bending abilities. Reversing time to solve the murders isn't as easy as catching the killer red-handed and then going back, as you're limited in how much time you can rewind and how frequently the loop resets the casino. You have to watch for clues and hints, and then rely on the time loop to use them at more appropriate moments. All in all, Sexy Brutale is an engaging experience that blends time travel with classic murder mystery stories in a really satisfying way. Number 4, Dharma City, Ghost Runner. Ghost Runner is a fast-paced action game in which you play as a katana-wielding cyborg, hacking and slashing your way through a neon-lit cyberpunk city. The game clearly cares about the coolness factor of its gameplay, and so, to maximize the excitement, Ghost Runner features a couple of time-related abilities, such as slowing down time and creating instantaneous kill chains by blinking between groups of enemies. These mechanics are perfect tools for making you feel worthy of your flashy katana, but Ghost Runner takes it even further with its level, Dharma City. The level is a perfect balance of difficult and satisfying, and provides you with plenty of opportunities to utilize your abilities in particularly creative and adrenaline-pumping ways. The layout of the wall jumps, parkour, and combat sequences are specifically designed to make every moment feel tense, but also manageable with the use of your abilities. Best of all, you're constantly surrounded by beautiful nighttime city surroundings, which adds a pleasing backdrop to your bloody crusade against Ghost Runner's baddies. Number 3, Elevator Pitch, Super Hot. Superhot is a genius game that uses the gimmicks of time manipulation to create fun, action-packed moments and challenging puzzles. The game's primary mechanic makes time travel forward only when the player is moving, making each of your gestures and actions feel like they could be the difference between life and death. The part of Superhot that illustrates this the best is the game's 18th level called Elevator Pitch. Though it's not the longest sequence in Superhot, it's easily one of the most challenging and intense, as it immediately throws you into a deadly scenario by trapping you inside an elevator ride with 3 opponents, one of which is already firing at you right from the start of the level. In order to complete the mission, you have to make use of your time traveling abilities to your absolute best. Every split-second decision you make must be executed perfectly, as the lack of space to move around and the constant threat surrounding you leave very little room for error. It takes a bit of retrying and assessing your situation in bullet time, but Superhot's elevator pitch is exactly what a time-traveling level ought to be about. Number 2, First Act, Quantum Break. Quantum Break is one of the most innovative and technologically impressive video games of 2015. Despite its somewhat questionable story, Quantum Break's time control gameplay features help it stand out compared to other third-person shooter titles. The game features several abilities that allow you to manipulate time by slowing it down in a designated area or stopping it entirely to allow your character to reposition himself in an instant. The combination of these abilities makes for a fast, exciting, and visually mind-blowing experience that the first segment of the game captures perfectly. You're thrown straight into the action, and although the wide variety of your time powers can feel overwhelming, the layout of the map as well as the dynamic of the battlefield are designed in such a way that you're free to experiment without feeling like the game's holding your hand. Quantum Break's gameplay starts to feel a bit repetitive later on, but in the beginning, your time powers will make your jaw drop at pretty much every corner of the map. Number 1, Effect and Cause, Titanfall 2. If you know, you know, and you probably saw this one coming, but if you don't, you absolutely need to hear about it. Effect and Cause is a mission in Titanfall 2 that's widely regarded as one of the most creative and impressive levels in any game ever. The lion's share of Effect and Cause's success can be attributed to its time travel mechanics. As you navigate the map, you can use a special device to instantly move between the past and the present, where the facility you're in is engulfed in chaos and destruction. The ability to simultaneously experience the chaos of your current surroundings and how serene they used to be is already pretty amazing, but this is just a fraction of the mechanic's genius. As you seamlessly phase between the 2 time periods, you're also supposed to utilize the changes in the environment to access new areas, change the course of combat, and do other cinematic things that will absolutely blow your mind. Being able to outmaneuver your enemies by shifting to a time when they're not there and jumping between timelines to breach a gap that hasn't yet formed is the crux of Effect and Cause's gameplay. The entire sequence feels like an action-packed sci-fi movie that you get to personally star in, the crowning achievement of Titanfall 2's brilliant single-player campaign.
There are some video game enemies who are more trouble than they're worth when an adversary has instant kill attacks, healing powers, a massive health bar, or itsy-bitsy teeny-weeny weak spots throwing the controller across the room in frustration is likely. In situations like this, players wish there was an easier way to put an end to things, and sometimes there is. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 video game bosses with genius hidden weaknesses. Number 10, Capra Demon, Dark Souls. After reaching the Undead Burg in Dark Souls, our unnamed protagonist is stopped dead in his tracks by a Capra demon. The brawl takes place in a confined room, dramatically impairing the player's movements. On top of that, the demon's attack dogs keep stunning the player, making it difficult to tackle the sinister satyr head-on. Luckily, there are ways to make this bout easier. If the Ring of Fog is equipped, the mangy mutt will ignore our hero, allowing him to focus all his attention on the boss. But by equipping another item, it's possible to vanquish the goat beast before setting foot in his room. That secret weapon is crap. Literally. While standing on the other side of the fog gate, the player can hurl dung pies over the wall, plopping right onto the demon's head. Making contact with excrement triggers the toxic status effect, sapping away the Capra's health. Once he's been hit with 10 or so dung pies, the feral fiend will succumb to his demise. What a way to go. Although there are similar strategies to best the Capra, this one is by far the funniest. Number 9, Hooktail, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. The first chapter of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door concludes with Mario duking it out with a dragon dragon called Hooktail. This beefy beast may be the first big boss, but she's not going to make things easy. Throughout the brawl, the wicked wyvern blasts Mario with her fire breath and gulps down his allies when she's feeling a bit peckish. However, the Mushroom Kingdom's beloved hero should have no trouble with Hooktail if he takes advantage of her weakness. In the village near Hooktail's castle, Mario can find a letter mentioning how the dragon fears something beginning with CR and ending in Ikit. That's right, she's afraid of very boring sports. Oh, wait, no, that's not quite what it means. What it's actually getting at is equipping the Attack FX R badge, which lets out a cricket chirp when Mario hits his target. Unless the player found this letter, they'd have no incentive to equip the item since it seems useless. But if Mario batters Hooktail while this badge is in tow, the nasty lizard's attacks and defenses will plummet. After hearing that chirping a couple of times, Hooktail will call it a day. Number 8's Gandahar, Two Worlds 2. In most games, the hero doesn't get a chance to confront their arch-nemesis until the climax of the story, but in Two Worlds 2, the central antagonist, Emperor Gandahar, shows up during the prologue. If the player attacks the Dark Wizard during this encounter, he'll retaliate with a fireball, putting an end to the adventure then and there. Obviously, this meeting is designed so it's impossible to beat Gandahar. After all, the developers wouldn't let the big bad bite the dust in the first couple of minutes, would they? Well, at least not intentionally. After attacking Gandahar, the hero can make their way towards a nearby village and hide amongst the citizens. If Gandahar blasts one of the villagers, all of the invincible NPCs will wail on the malevolent mage, murdering him. And that's it. Once Gandahar's health gauge is empty, it skips straight to the ending of the game, assuming that the player has beaten the main campaign fair and square. Unsurprisingly, this glitch was patched out soon after it became common knowledge, since it allowed players to complete Two Worlds 2 in 5 minutes, when a normal playthrough should take over 20 hours. Number 7, Yu Yevon, Final Fantasy X. To avoid spoiling a, 20-year-old game at this point, in Final Fantasy X's climax, Tidus and friends must essentially face down a giant monster that's got the power of Sin. Once the player defeats this, they move on to the final enemy, which is Sin's creator, Yu Yevon. Even though Yu Yevon doesn't have a ton of HP, the cosmic parasite is infuriating since he restores a ton of health every time he's attacked. Despite the fact that Tidus' team can't technically lose this battle, players will find themselves in a stalemate unless they get creative. Although there are several ways to get around Yu Yevon's annoying strategy, there is one clever technique that can't fail. If the player wishes to end this showdown as quickly as possible, and let's be honest, why wouldn't you? All they have to do is cast Zombie on the overgrown bedbug. Now that Yu Yevon is technically undead, bestowing him with the life-giving item Phoenix Down will have the opposite effect, destroying him in an instant. Sure, it's a really cheap tactic, but it's pretty justified since Yu Yevon doesn't exactly fight fair himself. Number 6, Spider Mastermind, Doom 2016. At the end of 2016's Doom, the Doomslayer must go head to ugly head with his original nemesis, the Spider Mastermind. Even if the Doomslayer's weapons are fully upgraded and have maximum ammo, victory cannot be guaranteed. The quadrupedal brain moves erratically and forces the player to do the same, making it tough to land a shot. If the Doomslayer keeps missing, he'll run out of ammo fast, leaving him with his basic pistol, which is useless against the foe. Although ammo does respawn, it's not much help near the end of the fight when the Spider Mastermind has poisoned the entire battlefield. Although players would think the BFG 9000 would turn the tide, it barely makes a dent in the enemy's gargantuan health bar. Luckily, there's a little trick that turns this scrap into a cakewalk. Immediately after shooting the Mastermind with the BFG, open the weapon wheel option. By doing so, the gameplay will slow down, causing the BFG shot to last longer, causing heavy damage to the apocalyptic arachnid. By exploiting this simple but devastating glitch, Doom's final boss can be brought down in 2 shots. Number 5, Jack Krauser, Resident Evil 4. Facing Jack Krauser in RE4 is grueling since the insidious soldier launches smoke bombs, grenades, crawling drones and hovering drones while spraying our curtain-haired hero Leon S. Kennedy with an endless supply of bullets. And he can also sneak up from behind Leon and slit his throat, killing him instantly. Oh yeah, and also, the area is rigged with timed explosives, meaning the player must defeat Krauser quickly or risk starting the section all over again. Once you get through that and reach the top of the tower, Krauser spawns a massive sword arm, initiating the last part of the fight. This phase is a nightmare since Krauser can use his blade like a shield to deflect Leon's most powerful attacks. If he trips Leon up, the menacing mercenary can cut him in 2, ending the battle in one fell swoop. However, Krauser can be killed with the weakest weapon in Leon's arsenal, the survival knife. Even though the shotgun and magnum barely stun Krauser, a few slashes from Leon's blade will make short work of him. Relying on this strategy is actually handy as well, since
since it helps Leon conserve ammo for later, making the final stages of the game drastically easier. Number 4, experiment number Z57, Metroid Dread. In Samus Aran's latest outing, many players found themselves getting killed again and again by experiment number Z57. Z57 telegraphs its attacks, but it's still tricky to avoid them since the screen-filling Behemoth constantly sweeps the arena with its tentacles and plasma breath. On top of that, the beastie sprays the floor with burning plasma, limiting Samus's ability to fight and strategize. The second phase of the battle is much harder since Z57 has more attack patterns and can regenerate health. Worst of all, the tyrannical test subject can activate the room's fans, which blow Samus into a scalding wall unless she keeps dashing forwards. However, the bounty hunting heroine can use the fans to her advantage. If Samus runs while the fans are active, she can trigger the Shine Spark ability, allowing her to cut through enemies' defenses. Although there's not enough room to activate the Shine Spark against other bosses, Samus will have this opportunity once the fans are operational, since she'll be spinning on the spot for at least a few seconds. After the Shine Spark is activated, Samus can charge straight at Z57, ending the battle prematurely. Number 3, Calais Deimos, The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. Calais Deimos is arguably the easiest boss in the Wind Waker. All Link has to do to beat the bloated Boko Baba is use the boomerang to disconnect its vines from the ceiling. When they're all cut down, Calais Deimos drops to the floor and opens its plumage, allowing the hero of time to hack at its vulnerable bud. After performing this action a couple of times, this Venus human trap is toast. But if the player can't be bothered with any of that, there's a sneaky way to defeat Calais Deimos that requires no skill whatsoever. Firstly, fill Link's bottle with forest water before entering the plant's territory. Once Calais Deimos drops to the floor, Link can kill it straight away by pouring the water into its weak spot. Granted, the forest water spoils after 30 minutes, meaning the player can't hang around for too long if they intend to fell this forest beast the easy way, but so long as Link fills his bottle before entering Calais Deimos' domain, the scrap can be over and done with in 30 seconds flat. Number 2, The End, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Ah yes, the classic. The secret way to defeat this Metal Gear Solid 3 boss is so well known, some people have never beaten the old codger the traditional way. Being over 100 years old, The End doesn't look particularly threatening, but since he has over 80 years of military training under his belt, the sniper is a force to be reckoned with. Unless Snake is a master of stealth, tracking, detection, sharpshooting, and adaptability, he's not going to walk out of this jungle alive. To avoid ending up in an early grave, players must pull out all the stops, or they can cheat. If the player doesn't play MGS3 for a week after they reach this point, 7 days will have passed in the game as well when it's booted up. Alternatively, the system's internal clock can be adjusted manually, so it seems like 1 week has passed. Upon returning to the game, Snake will see The End has died of old age, allowing him to skip the battle completely. Number 1, Star Scourge Radahn, Elden Ring. Of the hundreds of bosses that Elden Ring presents, Star Scourge Radahn is amongst the most daunting. He may be an optional foe, but the legendary demigod must be eliminated if the player wishes to unlock the true ending. However, defeating Radahn is a Herculean task. Even with the most powerful weapons, upgrades, spells, and stats, Radahn can end the fight with one swing of his blades. As a result, any tactic revolving around healing potions is obsolete. Once Radahn loses half his health, he'll execute his most devastating move, launching himself into the sky before crashing to the earth with the force of an asteroid. Not only is this an instant kill, it's astoundingly difficult to dodge. Ironically, this onslaught will prove to be Radahn's undoing. Although his skills in combat are unequaled, the fiery titan isn't great at judging distances. When Radahn soars into the air to prep his finisher, the player needn't worry. If they stand at the shore while staring out at the water, Radahn will plow right into the sea, bringing the battle to an abrupt but welcome end.
Hey guys, Jules here for WhatCulture.com, and I want to talk to you today about being a pirate. No, not the R on the seas matey, nor the bum variety, but about video game piracy. Now, I'm no white hat wearer on the subject, let me tell you, I've swiped more snacks than I do on Tinder, but it does amuse me when developers go to great lengths to get one back on those who've nabbed their games for free. These are 8 anti-piracy measures that were utter genius. Number 8, Take on Helicopters, Vaseline Vision. Now, Take on Helicopters isn't just the way I want to die fighting, but also a simulator game about flying helicopters, surprise, surprise, made by the wonderfully anal developers over at Bohemia Interactive. Now, one of the main requirements to flying an aircraft is sight. I can't actually fly a plane because I'm partially colourblind, but when I'm staring at those lovely greys and lighter greys in the skyline, I think to myself, you know what would suck? If my helicopter windscreen suddenly began to degrade like it was being smeared with Vaseline until all I could see was an impending and possibly fiery death. Well, good news, because that's exactly what happens if you decide to pirate the game, and it's a lovely way to experience cataracts if you so wish. So have fun flying in a lubed-up window. Cheers. Number 7. The Settlers 3 Pig Iron. Now, as all blacksmiths in the audience will know, pig iron, or crude iron, is an immediate byproduct of the iron industry. It's also very useful in the game The Settlers 3, used as a resource to build weapons of war. Therefore, it's surprising and hilarious to note that if you pirated the game, then the devs switched a few things around. Trees would no longer produce fruit, you can't make new people to expand your empire, but best of all, the ironsmiths would churn out pigs rather than resources. So instead of some pokey sticks, you'd get some porky snorters, and seeing as they're the only thing you can make on demand, your kingdom will be so full of swine that it will look like Gateshead before the day is done. And cheeky little piglets will truly know what it feels like to be a con. Get it? Be a con bacon. Oh, I get paid for this. Number 6. Garry's Mod. Personalised ban. Garry's Mod is a brilliant piece of kit, allowing neckbeards, young and old, to flex their fat hands and Dorito shavings to make the best maps, game modes, and set pieces they possibly can. It's in a similar vein to Minecraft in that there's no set objective other than to go wild and see what you can make. It's also dirt cheap and nearly always on sale in some form or another, yet if you decide the price tag is too steep, you could always steal it. However, if you do, then you might experience a few errors, amongst which is this one, which reads, "Unable to shade polygon normals," and then it's followed by a code. Now, here's the twist. This error code is actually unique and tied directly to your Steam account. Therefore, if you were to, say, post this in an official forum asking for help, then instead of a friendly guide, you'd be shown the door with a big old ban. Ah well, at least it's a personalised one, right? I framed mine. Number 5. The Sims 4 Pixelization. Any long-term gamer with a soft spot for The Sims will see pixelization every time their little ants go to the toilet or use a shower. However, if you pirated the game, you're going to see a lot more of this, and that's because even after your sprites have gone for a spritz, they will stay pixelated. Now, that might not sound terrible at first. After all, we live in a world of 8-bit love and throwback gaming graphics. However, the pixelization grows and grows and grows until all you can see is a full screen of D-res depression. Welcome to the visual wasteland, where Pixel A, which might be a person, moves over towards Pixel B, which might be a baby, or a plant, or a bin. It's a horrifying world in which only pirates can live, and it's hilariously awful. Insert joke about EA punishing pirates while being scumbags. Yeah, I'm aware. Number 4. Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders, Pirate Jail. A lovely little point-and-click adventure, this. Zacky Macky and the Aliens That Attack is pure LucasArts through and through, mixing challenging puzzles with off-the-wall comedy and a ton of memorable moments in between. Now, while the graphics might look pretty dated, that soundtrack is slamming yo! Yet, if you pirate the game, there's a chance that the only slamming that you'll hear is that of prison bars, because if you mess up, there's a chance that your character might be taken to a pirate-themed jail. Now, by mess up, I mean that at one point your character is asked to input a code. Now, if you have the instruction booklet, you'll know which image to put in and which code and which page to basically look up. But if you mess up 5 times, then you end up here. Pirate Jail! And that's just the beginning, because this fellow here, who we'll dub Captain Kilroy, paces back and forth delivering a really long lecture on the evils of piracy, often turning to the player to state things like, "I think it's time you bought a legitimate copy," and "he hopes that you rot there." Then he narcs off, probably to join Fidel Castro for a smoke, and leaves you there forever. Brilliant. Number 3. Far Cry 4 FOV Madness. So, I'm no coder. Believe me, just typing in a phone number is a challenge for this lad, but from what I've seen online and been told, even the slightest few lines of wrong code can balls up your game. It's the bane of many PC players, for example, who regularly group up together in forums to help each other solve issues with games. Issues like when you get into a vehicle in Far Cry 4 and it turns into something akin to travelling through a time warp. It's hilarious, but hardly practical when you're being hunted down by mercenaries. So, you might think, let's get some other nerds dialed in to help me out. Yet, if you posted this problem in the Far Cry forums, you'd only be met with a ban, as it turns out this was a clever anti-piracy measure. Ubisoft put out many of these copies themselves onto torrent sites to discourage people, and when they reported the mistake and that there was no FOV slider to fix it, they were met with a big old ban. There was, of course, the slider option in the real game, but pirates had to either endure the warp or hoof it around the entire area. No thanks. Number 2. Earthbound. Difficulty and death. Can we all just stop and appreciate how bloody good Earthbound is? Honestly, it's one of the weirdest and most wonderful games I've ever played, and you know where I'm going with this, kids. It's one of my favourite RPGs of all time! Yet some people can't appreciate a good thing, and Pirates certainly won't be having a good time with this one. First off, the difficulty is ramped up quite considerably by having tons more random enemy encounters hamper the flow of the game. This was clearly done to put people off with the sheer challenge. However, we all live in this world where people have just beaten Dark Souls with Guitar Hero controllers. People live for challenge. Therefore, you might have gone through the game regardless, laughing at the level of grind that Nintendo presented you with. Well, the joke's on you, friend, because if you make it all the way to the final Gygas fight, you're in for a shock. The game checks its connection to the game's system just before the second phase of the fight, and if it finds any consistencies, it locks the game and forces you to restart. Fine, you think, that's okay, I'll just go back to... Oh wait, where's my save? Did the game just delete my save? Oh, Nintendo, you saucy, saucy minx. Well played. And number 1, Michael Jackson The Experience, Vuvuzelas. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this wasn't on the top of my most known about games before I started researching this list, but I am so glad it came up because what an absolute for the banter anti-piracy measure MJ The Experience has. If you're trying to boot up the King of Pop's DS games via nefarious reasons, then you will be met with something a little different than the sounds of Instead, you'll have all of his songs drowned out by vuvuzelas. You know, the tiny plastic horn that sounds like a dying ox being groped by Ben Stein.
Bueller.
Now, Marcelo Oliveira, the person responsible for putting it in the game, literally did it for laughs, and apparently Ubisoft knew nothing about it. It's so bizarre and brilliant that I almost want to download this version over the original, as it turns the experience into something much more brilliant and much more annoying.
Is there anything that shoots really great video game pacing in the foot faster than a really long load screen? Unfortunately, as games get bigger, the times required to render the next levels do as well. That's why it's fantastic when you run up against a game that cleverly loads the next scene while you still feel like you're playing it, or at least maintain your enthusiasm till it's time to pick up the controller again. I'm Jess from More Culture, and here are 10 genius ways video games hide load times. Number 10, Squid Games, Splatoon. Now, Nintendo's a company that tends to be pretty on top of things when it comes to fan service. In their colourful multiplayer game Splatoon, you're probably gonna want to play online, but those lobby wait times can be kind of brutal. This is where one of the Wii U's few selling points, the dual screen, comes into play. While you wait on the main TV screen to be matched with teammates and opponents, there are a number of cute little mini-games available for you to play on the gamepad, each involving a small and agile squid. The default minigame is Squid Jump, a game that involves you jumping to increasingly high platforms trying to escape some rising water. But if you introduce your collection of amiibos into the mix, you're able to unlock 3 additional minigames: Squid Ball, Squid Racer, and Squid Beats. Often you get so engrossed in these games that you'll even end up missing the start of your online match. And what makes this entry even rarer is that due to the lack of a dual screen on the Nintendo Switch, Splatoon 2 no longer has this option, which is a shame. Number 9, Comms Crawls, Gears of War series. Being a van-sized brute with testosterone to spare and a jaw the size of a small combine harvester, stopping to take orders may not feel like the most intuitive option. You're still a soldier though, and not only do these regular debriefings fill you in on where to go and what to do next, they also give the game ample time to get the next area ready for you. In the Gears of War series, you'll occasionally be contacted by your superiors or vice versa, which serves the purpose within the narrative of keeping each party up to date on the mission progress. During these sequences, you're unable to run, shoot, or even shake the foundations of the earth with your bumbling crouching maneuvers. This forces you to take a breather, and your slowed pace allows the game to load that next area without pulling you entirely out of the action. This certainly isn't the only game series to make use of this technique, but given the immensely fast pace of the Gears of War games, it's especially rewarding not to have to sit through a whole load of loading screens and sacrifice any of that precious manliness. Number 8, Intro Movie, Tony Hawk's Project 8. Being a series named after a real-life sports personality, it probably doesn't come as a surprise that the Tony Hawk games feature plenty of live footage of skateboarders showing off their kickflips. The first installment in the Pro Skater series included a reel of these just before the game's main menu, and 2006's Project 8 does much the same, though with a couple of intriguing twists. Obviously, the first change you'll notice is that this video is fully computer generated, with Tony Hawk and others represented in the style of the game's graphics. More interestingly, however, is that for the PS3 version, the cinematic plays the first time you insert the disc into the console. This may seem like just a nice way of acclimatizing you to the game's atmosphere, but what it's actually doing is hiding part of the installation process, a loading screen you almost always dread seeing. As soon as it's over, the game's installed and you're good to go. How painless was that? Number 7. Rewind time in-game instead. The Talos Principle. In a puzzle game, the restart level option is something you usually become very well acquainted with. It's infuriating enough that you've mucked up the puzzle, but waiting around for everything to reset can sometimes be the final nail in the coffin. The Talos Principle, however, has you playing as an advanced android, and that comes with some pretty nifty benefits. Built into your arm is a device that can literally rewind time to the point before you began the puzzle. This process takes barely 2 seconds, totally negating the need to go into the menu and reload the whole area. Whether you've got yourself somewhere you just can't get out of, lost an essential item behind a closed gate, or just want a fresh start, holding the button for a brief moment will completely reverse all of the actions you've made up till this point. By doing this, you're saving yourself a ton of extra annoyance having to go through various menu screens, and you don't have to separate from your character. Number 6. Bridging set pieces. God of War series. While many video games may be known for this crafty little trick, good lord does God of War do it better than almost anybody else. You'll notice this from the very first installment right the way up to Kratos' bearded 2018 outing. Basically, anytime you come across a long and fairly empty pathway, a treacherous wall climb, or a set of stairs going on for ages, you're essentially buying the game some time to seamlessly load the next area. After all, the legendarily angry Kratos is not one to wait around behind a pesky loading screen. With the fixed camera perspective of the first 3 games, this technique was far more common in the early years of God of War. It does show up briefly in 2018's God of War though, as before a wide open section in the realm of Helheim is a short S-shaped crevice that Kratos and Atreus must crouch underneath to get through. Granted, these kinds of things aren't the most fun things you'll be looking at in a video game, but between that and a black loading screen for 30 seconds, I know what I'd choose. Number 5. Planet hopping. Ratchet & Clank series. The amount of planets available for you to explore in each Ratchet & Clank is truly impressive, and makes you feel like a bona fide interstellar explorer. Of course, you don't just teleport magically from world to world. These kind of trips take time and a sturdy vessel to get you from A to B. In the early entries of the series, you grow oddly attached to your trusty spaceship, which is largely down to the repeated shots of it zooming through space every time you travel to another planet. There are usually no more than 3 of these clips before the world appears in your view, and each of them are different. The length of this sequence is realistic in that it really feels like you're actually on a journey and not just being dropped into the next level after a loading screen. Your investment gets deeper every time your ship is upgraded, as you're eager to see those shots of your new ride as it soars towards your destination, and each subsequent flight becomes a lasting reminder of how far you've come. Number 4. Door animation. Resident Evil. A game as revolutionary as Resident Evil was bound to have a pretty good trick up its sleeve when it came to dealing with this issue, and it's such a good trick that it persisted not only through the series' early games but also the remakes. The fixed camera rooms of the mansion create a haunting inflexibility about the environment you're trapped in, and most of the time, the only way to get from one to the other is via a creaking old wooden door. Interacting with these doors triggers a scripted animation in which the door is slowly pulled open to reveal a pure black expanse behind it. And as the camera goes through, you'll suddenly find yourself in the next room. The sequence is meant to amp up the tension as you continue your exploration. Some games even include a jump scare or 2 here, but basically what it's doing is covering up the time it's taking to load the next area. So memorable was this section that Resident Evil's GameCube remake, which all but eliminates the loading times, deliberately replicates these doorway pauses to reinstate the original's drawn-out creepiness. Number 3. Chalice Dungeon Lifts. Bloodborne. Pretty much every From Software game, from Demon's Souls to Sekiro, features long elevator rides that eliminate the need to stop and load the next area. But one place you really notice this impressive transition is in Bloodborne's polarizing procedural tombs, the Chalice dungeons. If you can look past the dull grind that most of these dungeons consist of, you may just begin to appreciate the fact that you can get from start to finish without seeing a single loading screen. The deepest Chalice dungeons can contain 4 levels, each separated by a lift at the end of the boss arena. These levels are loaded in real time, and the time it takes you to descend in the lift is just enough time for the level to populate by the time you arrive. Want to see something really impressive? If you come across a wide open room with creaking wooden bridges stretching across it, falling off the edge can sometimes result in you plummeting straight down to a lower part of the dungeon, which it will notify you of just as the "you died" text appears. Love them or hate them, the Chalice dungeons are huge, detailed environments, and for them to be able to load in without having to throw you to a loading screen is pretty darn impressive. Number 2, Warm-Up Halls, Mega Man, 1987. The Mega Man series as a whole is fiendishly hard, and the one that started it all gave rise to that reputation for a very good reason. With boss fights as tough as these, having a special hallway before each one not only gives you warning that they're coming, but also serves to mask the loading screen that would otherwise have ruined your fun. These hallways have a unique wall texture that varies between each one, and are usually filled with spikes, pitfalls, and enemies that leap all over the place. The narrow space really feels like some kind of preliminary gauntlet before an upcoming test, which in turn heightens the superior status of the bosses, shut away from all the lowly fodder enemies. But the purpose of these areas isn't just to build suspense, it's also to have a sparse enough area that it can load the next arena in the background, more likely the arena that will cause your inevitable demise. Number 1, Star Map, No Man's Sky. Though the free updates have improved it tenfold, No Man's Sky is still not quite the game we thought it was going to be when it was first announced. To the developers' credit, they said they'd give us a whole universe, and they did, even if it's a whole universe of practically identical barren wastelands. And while the game's load times aren't the shortest you'll find, quite the opposite generally speaking, Hello Games do make the effort to incorporate ways of hiding them. Firstly, the pretty star map that appears when you boot up the game is not just a stock video, it's actually a real-time rendering of the game's 18 quintillion planets. You're not likely to visit many of these, but the experience still gives you that feeling of physically traveling across the galaxy to your starting destination. Then there's the game's procedural wizardry, which creates environments and planets literally as and when you first see them. Flying into a planet's atmosphere from outer space requires no loading whatsoever, the compromise being that the terrain beneath sometimes pops in entirely too late. Taking the portal from a space station to your home base is also a way the game disguises its load times, though given the amount of time that takes, it might be a stretch to include it.
Murder is the bread and butter of most video games. While there are of course great non-violent titles that have achieved huge success, shooters and action games still dominate the market, and that means players will do a lot of killing over their gaming career. Of course, some developers make you think twice about pulling the trigger, and do find inventive ways to punish players for murdering with unique game overs or even unique set pieces. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 genius ways video games punished you for killing. Number 10, a demonic visage, Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. The Metal Gear Solid franchise has always had a few tricks up its sleeve when it comes to telling players off for giving in to their more bloodthirsty impulses. So with this entry, you actually get 2 for the price of 1, so don't ever say I don't give you anything. The first genius punishment for leaving a trail of bodies in your wake comes in Metal Gear Solid 3, a game which, well, literally confronts you with that trail of bodies. In this beloved Big Boss prequel, you encountered the Sorrow late in the game, a supernatural character who haunts you on a long trek through the spirit world. Here, you're confronted by the souls of the people you've killed who show up as ghostly figures. If you've been particularly trigger-happy previously, this can turn into quite the laborious sequence. Metal Gear Solid 5 similarly punishes players for killing people by awarding them with demon points. The more kills you rack up, the more demonic playable character Venom Snake becomes, and I mean this literally, as the devil horn in your head, in lore this is just a piece of lodged shrapnel, grows with the amount of evil actions you've accomplished. Number 9, Chaos Events Dishonored. Arcane games are always subtly keeping track of player behaviour, and most even alter the experience to accommodate the kinds of choices, moral or otherwise, players make on a moment-to-moment basis. In the original Dishonored, this was kept track of via a chaos meter, which made the game more difficult the higher it went. If you kept this ticking up, you'd end up having streets teeming with plague rats and having to deal with more human enemies stationed around maps. And the best way to increase your chaos rating, well, you guessed it was indiscriminate killing. Dishonored accommodates a whole bunch of playstyles and gives you the tools you need to ghost through levels without being seen by guards, as well as non-lethal weapons to knock out anyone in your path. You also have guns and swords that'll just take the heads clean off them as well though. So, the choice is yours. You can edge towards the bad ending and encounter tougher enemies, which is justified in-game as being a response to so many people turning up dead, or keep it holstered when you can. Number 8. Insanity, The Sinking City, and more. The Sinking City, of course, isn't the first game to have an insanity meter. From Eternal Darkness to Amnesia, horror titles often put the playable character's sanity at the forefront of the experience, with encounters with monsters and the supernatural taking their toll on the hero's mental well-being. However, nothing in The Sinking City depletes that meter quite like killing an innocent human being. As an open world game, you spend a lot of time exploring this Lovecraftian environment and interacting with people who aren't monsters out for your blood, though they might just be your regular old nice monsters. Whipping out a gun and shooting these people, or battering them with your shovel, whatever you fancy, will cause a temporary madness in your character. Not only does this impact gameplay by shaking the screen and making the visuals blurry, but it also increases the chance of spawning in creatures that, unlike the poor civilians you've just offed, actually will fight back. Number 7. Child Killer, Fallout. Even in games that stress complete freedom, killing kids is usually a no-no. In your sprawling sandboxes and killathons today, the younger NPCs all force you to put your weapons down, and you can see why. With the increased realism of games, it's a disaster waiting to happen if someone can go out and start gruesomely picking off the young'uns, no matter how fake they might be. It wasn't always like this though, and in older RPGs like the original isometric Fallout titles, you really did have 100% freedom. That doesn't mean the devs didn't pass judgment on your actions though, and if you did strike down a child in those titles, you'd be branded for life. After a couple of kills in Fallout, you'll be branded a child killer and understandably will be shunned by most NPCs. You can keep playing of course, but your karma tanks, you'll be hunted down by mercenaries in the wasteland seeking revenge, and some vendors will just become off limits. Despite these in-game penalties though, the title still ended up being banned in Europe until the developers removed the child NPCs entirely. Number 6. Straight to Jail, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. It's not entirely novel for games to punish you for killing, as you'd be punished in real life by being sent straight to jail. However, in a lot of titles, this is treated as more of a nuisance than a real consequence. In GTA, for instance, if you get caught, you just lose some money and are immediately kicked back onto the streets. The Elder Scrolls series has always treated crime and punishment a little differently though. Here, if you're caught for a crime, you'll be given a bunch of options. Sometimes you have to pay a fine, but other times you're confronted with a guard who wants to take you straight to jail. The thing is, this isn't just a fail state, and in the case of Oblivion, you really will be dragged to the cells and need to figure out a way to break yourself out. It's not that hard to escape and steal your stuff back admittedly, but it does definitely provide a bigger consequence for being a criminal, and can result in some pretty interesting playthroughs. Number 5, locked out of everything, Dark Souls. Dark Souls is obviously a punishing series, however what makes it so challenging is that it finds ways to mess with players even outside of combat. See, friendly NPCs are few and far between in this series, and as a result it's probably not the best idea to start fighting the few allies you actually have. If you do decide to, say, behead the vendors, blacksmiths, and quest givers around the Firelink Shrine though, be prepared to pay a hefty price. See, these deaths are often permanent, and while you might nab yourself a cool trinket or item from their cold dead corpses, you'll also be unable to court their services or further their quest lines. You're only robbing yourself of content if you actually kill them then, and the loss of some of these characters can be felt massively as the game progresses. Number 4, Krampus's Revenge, Don't Starve. Don't Starve might be the most charming horror game you'll ever play. In it, you, well, try not to starve by surviving day to day in a harsh, spooky wilderness. During the day, you need to scavenge supplies and make sure you're ready for the sun going down, as deadly monsters come with that darkness. You're not entirely alone though, as the environment is littered with a variety of animals similarly just trying to get on with their day, though some do transform into monsters at night, but you can't really hold that against them. The game classes these creatures as innocents, and as such, killing them will increase a naughtiness meter. I mean, if you ask me, bludgeoning a pig to death is a little bit more than naughty, but it is what it is. Kill too many of these animals and you'll be put on the naughty list of one Krampus, who won't punish you by dropping coal down your chimney, but instead pay your camp a visit and steal all your crap. Now you can fend off Krampus from throwing all your tat in his sack, but why would you want to go to the trouble when you can just be nice instead of naughty? Number 2, Void Out's Death Stranding. Death Stranding's entire point is human connection. Unlike most AAA blockbusters, this was a game where you simply delivered parcels to people, with your biggest enemies being the rocks that you might twist your ankle on. Of course, there still were a few conventional enemies, including psychopathic porters so obsessed with deliveries that they'd attack you for your cargo on sight. But the game provides you with a genius in-universe explanation for why you shouldn't simply put a bullet between the eyes of these dudes. When the titular Death Stranding delivered the apocalypse to the world, it also resulted in humans now going through a necrosis process when they died. Essentially, this meant that dead bodies became atomic bombs, and if not disposed of properly via incineration, would void out, aka detonate, within 48 hours. Even a single necrotized body could wipe out an entire city, which is actually what happened to Manhattan in the early days of The Stranding. Consequently then, while the game allows you to kill anyone you see, it even gives you shotguns and rocket launchers to do so if you wish, you'll have to then haul those bodies a long way to an incinerator if you don't want them to turn the landscape into a crater that'll make your deliveries even tougher. Number 1, EXP and Love, Undertale. Undertale is one sneaky devil of a game. The side-scroller subverts your expectations every step of the way, right down to your assumptions of what its basic stats even stand for. See, as you play through the title and battle the various monsters along the way, you'll have the choice to not kill your enemies. The twist is, this is much more difficult than just killing them, and it also means you don't get EXP points and, in turn, don't get the chance to increase your love, aka HP in this game. So the more you kill, the more you level up, the stronger you get. It's pretty basic video game logic, isn't it? Well, it is until the end where it's revealed that there have been real consequences to your murder spree. See, it turns out that EXP doesn't stand for experience like you might have guessed, but rather execution points, while your love has been keeping track of your level of violence. So, all of those monsters you've slain, yeah, it turns out they didn't deserve it at all, and these meters are now just a constant reminder of how careless your slaughter has been.
You know what? The vast majority of video games don't do much to innovate or change up the genre formula because, let's be honest, if it ain't broke, why fix it? But every so often a game comes along that remixes and reinvents existing mechanics in extraordinarily clever and inspired ways. Enough so that it massively elevates the entire experience. So let's take a look at them today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 genius gameplay tricks that made video games way better. Number 10. Destructible environments. Red Faction. It's tough to know what might have happened to Red Faction were it not for its famous geomod tech. A solidly enjoyable Total Recall-inspired first-person shooter, the game was elevated to the next level by its literally groundbreaking destructible environments. Geomod, geometry modification, allowed players to use their arsenal of weaponry to blast the ever-loving piss out of the environment. Whether that was just for fun or to fashion out a shortcut, it was enormously well received by both players and critics alike. The mechanic reappeared in future games in the series, namely the impressively comprehensive Red Faction Guerrilla, though without the wow factor of the original game, the franchise surely wouldn't exist. That's not to say that Red Faction doesn't feel like an impressive tech demo at times. It's very short for one, but the extent to which you were able to tear up the environment felt like a fascinating step forward for the first-person genre. Yet due to the technical challenges of implementing destructible scenery, it remains a rarity today. Number 9. The Social Strand System. Death Stranding. Death Stranding is one of the most singular video games of the entire decade, a mesmerizing big-budget delivery simulator in which players are tasked with getting packages to their desired destinations by any means necessary. As masterfully engineered as the delicate traversal gameplay is, though, it's the innovative Social Strand system that truly takes things to the next level. Hideo Kojima's approach to asynchronous multiplayer allows players to build persistent objects in the environment, bridges, ropes, zip lines, even buildings, which can be accessed by other connected players. There's no way to directly interact with others in the game, but being able to see and use their creations and also rate their efforts through the game's like system ensures that there's a palpable connection with other humans embarking on the same adventure. In a game where the player can be left to their own devices for lengthy periods of time, this ensures that they're always tethered to humanity in a small but vital way. Number 8. Controlling one brother with each thumbstick. Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons is a game that surely won't be forgotten by anyone who's ever played it, largely due to how creatively it fuses one brilliantly unique gameplay mechanic with an emotionally engaging story. The game follows two brothers as they embark on a perilous quest to retrieve a cure for their ailing father, but rather than have the player control one son while the other is controlled by either a co-op player or AI, Brothers is actually an entirely single-player experience outside of the Switch version, which sees each of the brothers assigned to one of your thumbsticks, requiring you to control them both at the same time in order to progress. Given that the older brother is stronger while the smaller one is more agile, you'll need to juggle their natural advantages to keep moving forward, and also pool their collective skills where necessary. This is such a simple idea that it's honestly fascinating that it hasn't been done before, well, at least not this well, and given that the deeply affecting nature of the game's story, it results in a majorly gratifying payoff. This is far more than a gimmick, as the team clearly thought about how the player would acclimate to controlling the brothers simultaneously, and how this would help a certain late game development land with a massive impact. Number 7. The Active Reload: Gears of War. The Gears of War franchise has been widely praised for its innovative cover shooting mechanics, but the feature that truly sets it apart from the competition, well, that is the active reloading. Active reload is effectively a mini-game where you attempt to manually reload your gun. If you can press the reload button again in an indicated area of the reload progress bar, your gun will be reloaded faster, and depending on your timing, you can pull off a perfect reload which grants you damage buffs, but if you mistime your button press, your gun will jam, leaving you vulnerable to nearby enemies. Active reload adds a fun, tactile element to gunplay and enhances the tension of a tricky firefight in the event that your gun ends up jamming. As such, it's surprising the mechanic hasn't appeared in more games, a fact that designer Cliff Bleszinski is surprised by, even freely encouraging other developers to use it. Number 6. The Quick Turn: Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Resident Evil 3 may be best remembered for inducing Nemesis to the franchise, who stalks the player throughout the game, but by far its most satisfying addition was a pretty basic quality of life feature. The earlier games in the series featured highly divisive tank controls that made even rudimentary maneuvering a real chore, so Capcom extended an olive branch to fans in the third game by introducing a quick turn ability. With the press of a button and the intended direction, players could now turn 180 degrees on the spot, allowing them to more easily escape an enemy rather than having to spend a few seconds awkwardly shuffling around. Given that Resident Evil 3's titular antagonist is terrifyingly lightning fast, it made sense that the game offers more intuitive movement functionality, granting a much-needed boost from the more sluggish movement of the previous titles. Number 5. The Euphoria Physics Engine: Grand Theft Auto 4. Say what you will about Grand Theft Auto 4, but the game's most pronounced innovation was the decision to use the Euphoria physics engine, resulting in comprehensive ragdoll physics which haven't been much better today. Rockstar clearly knew that they were onto something here, given the inclusion of a push button for the first time in the series, allowing players to shove unsuspecting NPCs off roofs and ledges, because it's basically entertaining enough to justify the game's existence in its own right. Similarly, watching protagonist Nico get cartoonishly flung around when he's hit by a car is both gut-bustingly hilarious and genuinely satisfying in an odd way, such that it's surprising Euphoria has been deployed in just a few games outside of Rockstar's own output. As it turns out, the reason for this is the cost and difficulty of implementing the engine, which in the case of GTA 4 benefited from being loaded on top of the game's Rockstar Advanced Game Engine, or RAGE. Almost 15 years later, GTA 4 remains the standard bearer for dynamic in-game physics. Number 4. The Nemesis System: Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. Without the Nemesis system, Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor would have been a competent, if not particularly memorable, open-world take on the Lord of the Rings franchise, but its fresh enemy tracking system ensured that few would ever forget it. Nemesis was a means through which the game remembered players' interactions with procedurally generated AI enemies. An Uruk that either kills the player or survives a fight with them will be promoted through the Uruk hierarchy, in turn becoming more powerful. If you encounter the same Uruk again, then they will remember you and perhaps even comment on an injury you gave them the last time around. Also, in the event that one of these guys kills you, another player on your friends list will be notified, allowing them the opportunity to avenge you. This is all a fantastic way to make an otherwise garden variety enemy encounter feel meaningful. Further complexities include the ability to generate rifts and infighting between the soldiers, effectively helping destabilize their army from within. All in all, the Nemesis system was far more interesting than Shadow of Mordor's actual cinematic story, so it's surprising that we haven't seen countless open-world games try to rip it off. Well, that is until you learn that Warner Bros. Was recently granted a patent for Nemesis, which would seemingly prevent other games from ever employing a similar system. Boo. Number 3. Climbing almost anything. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild is one of the greatest video games of the decade, ambitiously taking the franchise into full open world territory with its massively expansive and rich sandbox. But the game's pièce de résistance is actually something far more simple: the ability to climb almost every part of the environment. This dovetails perfectly into the game's wide open world, where Nintendo presents the player with this gorgeous new rendition of Hyrule and basically lets them do whatever they want. The world is positively teeming with things to do and discover, and climbing is a vital component in fostering a sense of curiosity in players. Being able to scale a mountain and then scan the horizon before taking off towards a landmark with your paraglider is a positively euphoric experience rarely matched in the genre. Climbing feels tactile and also challenging at times, as players need to keep an eye on their stamina gauge and ensure that they take rests where possible. It may not be the most complex aspect of the game, but it is the most inspired, ensuring that players always have a more direct tether to the game world than ever before. Number 2. The in-universe user interface. Dead Space. Dead Space is one hell of a video game any way you cut it, and its atmospheric sci-fi survival horror shenanigans are elevated significantly by the developer's decision to implement a diegetic user interface. That is to say that there's no conventional heads-up display in this game whatsoever. All of the usual attributes that you expect to see displayed on a screen will appear within the universe of the game itself. Protagonist Isaac Clarke's health and stasis meter appear on the back of his suit, such that they're always available for the player to view in every moment of the game. For more comprehensive elements like Isaac's inventory and the map, they're projected as in-game holograms. Because these aspects exist within the game's world, they don't pause the action, meaning that the player is always bolted into the adventure, in turn heightening the tension at every moment. It's surprising that diegetic user interfaces such as this don't appear more often, because when they're done right, they can add immeasurably to the overall experience. And number 1, rewind time to undo mistakes. Forza. Though Forza wasn't the first racing game franchise to implement a rewind mechanic, it certainly was the first to truly popularize it in a way that made even non-racing game fans pay attention. Starting with Forza Motorsport 3, the series has allowed players to rectify their mistakes on the track, rewinding the action to get another go at a tricky corner or approach a hairpin bend a little more conservatively. Given that the primary frustration with racing games is taking part in a lengthy race only to spin out in the final stretch, this is a majorly welcome feature to both respect players' time and keep their blood pressure in check. And the beauty of this, of course, is that purists are in no way obligated to use this feature, and so those who would prefer to suffer for their mistakes are absolutely free to do so, while the rest of us can just breathe a sigh of relief as we take another crack at the road ahead. The problem, though, is that Forza does end up spoiling you on racing games that don't have this feature. It's just so damn handy that it feels like it should be a basic accessibility feature across the entire genre at this point.
Cheating means different things to different players, and for most people, if you're not doing it in an online multiplayer type setting, it's kind of all good. I mean, no one really minds what you're doing in your own single-player walled-off experience. It's all in good fun, right? All the same, the sheer pervasiveness of cheating in games has forced developers to get smart and devise some truly mesmerizing means to punish and defend their games against cheaters. Following up on our previous list on the subject, here comes another 10 games which did something truly unique, creative, and perhaps even hilarious while battling cheaters of all kinds. I'm Jess from What Culture, and here are 10 more genius ways video games fought cheaters. Number 10. The nude cheat makes Lara explode instead. Tomb Raider 2. In the case of the Tomb Raider franchise, developers' core design weren't so much bothered about players cheating to beat the original game. They included cheat codes in it after all, but rather their dogged fascination with a mythic nude cheat. After the first Tomb Raider game took the world by storm in 1996, legend started to spread that there was indeed a cheat code where you could see Lara Croft sans clothing. Without any such cheat being uncovered though, modders took matters into their own hands, creating a Nude Raider patch for the PC version of the game, which indeed allowed players to run around as Lara in the buff. Core Design weren't particularly thrilled about this, and so devised a novel solution of sorts, trolling the hell out of anyone trying to input the supposed nude cheat in Tomb Raider 2. Word quickly did the rounds, as probably spread by the devs themselves, that the sequel did include and accept the nude cheat. It was even printed in a bunch of gaming magazines at the time. But the twist? Inputting the sequence instead resulted in Lara spontaneously exploding in mid-air, effectively flipping the bird to thirsty players in hilariously tongue-in-cheek fashion. Number 9. Cheaters are put on trial and pelted with tomatoes. RuneScape. In 2012, more than a decade after MMORPG RuneScape released, developers Jagex released a new area in the game called Botany Bay. It was effectively a prison where players caught using bots and hacks to automate play were put on trial in front of an assembled crowd of their human peers. The Bot Finder General would give the offending player a scathing verbal dressing down, all while they're pelted with rotten tomatoes by players, before the General finds them guilty and asks all players present to vote on their fate. The possible outcomes would include being crushed from above, eaten by a worm, or incinerated. The first time a player is caught botting, they'll receive a 24-hour ban, followed by a 48-hour ban on a second offense, and on their third infraction, they'll be permanently banned. That's pretty damn fair, honestly, giving transgressive players 3 opportunities to get on the straight and narrow before casting them into the digital abyss. Number 8. The Taxman comes after money cheaters. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. In our previous list, we told you how developers CD Projekt Red released the Bovine Defense Force Initiative to try and combat players using a glitch in The Witcher 3. But the developer truly outdid themselves when it came to broadly dealing with anyone using money cheats to get ahead. With the release of the Hearts of Stone expansion a few months after the main game, players who amassed a certain amount of currency, a figure most certainly achieved by cheating, would be approached by Walthamore Mitty, Deputy Tax Enumerator, who needs answers for your inexplicably accrued wealth. Mitty will grill you about whether you engaged in illicit sales of hides and pearls through exploits, and if you denied taking part, he'll deem you in good standing. If you're honest, dumb, or curious enough to fess up, though, he'll slap you with a fine to deal with your misgivings. While this is ultimately more of a funny nod towards players abusing The Witcher 3's various money exploits, it's still a totally ingenious way for CD Projekt Red to both acknowledge their own mistakes and gently chide players for being so damn greedy. Number 7. Barbatos destroys you if you try to auto-level. Tales of Destiny Director's Cut. Granted, grinding is not the most invigorating activity you can do in any video game, so it's hard to ding players who decide to get involved in it in order to press themselves higher up in levels. In the original release of the PS2 remake of RPG Tales of Destiny, players discovered they could auto-level their party by simply setting all the characters to auto and tapping one of the controller's analog sticks down, causing them to run around the map in circles and continually fight random battles. But for the 2008 Director's Cut, Namco Tales Studios came up with a brilliantly devious solution that would stop players from fully automating the leveling process. One that's tough not to respect, honestly. After 20 minutes of automated play, the villain of the game, Barbatos, will rock up and say, "What are you fools running in circles for?" before initiating a battle. Now, the ultra-powerful Barbatos also makes it clear that the only way to survive the fight is to flee, but if you're letting the game level up so idly, you obviously won't be around to see the message. And so Barbatos will wipe the damn floor with your party in record time, causing a game over and preventing the player from auto-leveling. Hell, the game over screen is even preceded by a patronizing message saying the game heroes were never heard of again. Ouch. It's so simple to just monitor the player's inputs, and yet so clever. As annoying as it might be for a developer to inhibit grinding, the execution is cool enough here to make it mostly forgivable. Number 6. The crowd throws cheese at you for cheesing Tiny Tiger. Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped. If you're familiar with the original release of Crash Bandicoot 3, then you might remember there's a pretty popular method for cheesing the Tiny Tiger boss fight in the Colosseum. If you run to the top left corner of the screen, you can easily avoid the fleets of lions which periodically come stampeding at the top of the arena. It's a well-known exploit, basically a cheat, which makes it considerably easier to deal with Tiny without having to worry about dodging those pesky rampaging lions. For 2017's Insane Trilogy, however, most players expected to just be able to abuse the cheat again consequence-free, but they got a rather hilarious surprise as a result. Going to the top left corner this time results in the Colosseum's patrons hurling giant chunks of cheese at you. As in, you're cheesing the boss. Get it? Granted, in this case, the remaster's developers, Vicarious Visions, were clearly just having some fun with fans, because they could have easily removed the exploit if they wanted. Instead, they did let players cheat away while gently ribbing them for doing so. Number 5. Support characters guilt trip you during battle, Persona 3. If all else fails, there's always the solution of straight up guilt tripping players and making the act of cheating so annoying they just might want to stop doing it. And so we have Persona 3, which had a bizarre yet brilliant surprise for players who used cheats to access party members or personas who weren't yet legitimately available. Prolonged complaints from your support characters. You'll likely hear the likes of Mitsuru and Fuka say things like, "You're cheating, I'll have to punish you. I trusted you, I can't believe you cheated. I'm very disappointed in you. Cheaters never win," and "You're cheating." Other than this, the game doesn't do anything to present you from hacking away to your heart's content, but after a good while of listening to your buddies chide you for being a dirty little cheat, it might actually start to get to you. When nothing else works, psychological warfare it is. Number 4. A fan made fake cheats to troll cheaters, Counter-Strike Global Offensive. When developers can't seem to stem the tide of cheating themselves, leave it to dedicated players with time on their hands to get to work instead. Counter-Strike Global Offensive's cheating epidemic apparently became too much for YouTuber ScriptKid, who in 2020 gained a reputation for creating fake cheating software to entrap, embarrass, and ultimately disable cheaters. In an impressively dedicated ruse, ScriptKid created some bogus software and paid out of his own pocket to advertise it on Google, ensuring that cheating players looking for some new hacks would download it. But ScriptKid's program would instead hijack the cheater's game and wreak havoc with a series of punishments. These included forcing the player to throw a flashbang or grenade at their own feet, auto-shooting on their teammates, shooting at the ceiling, and so on. Basically, the goal was to clearly ruin the cheater's experience and render them a laughingstock, or make them even enough of an annoyance that they get kicked by players for actually wanting to play the game properly. Genius. Number 3. The God of Death, Doom, publicly erases cheaters from existence, Guild Wars. We've previously detailed how Guild Wars 2 dealt with one especially egregious cheater by hijacking his account, stripping him naked, killing him, and then deleting his account before posting the video online for players to savor. But the original game was no slouch in the punishment department either, with an equally theatrical method of dealing with cheaters by straight up cutting them down in front of the rest of the server. Developers ArenaNet released an update in 2010 which would cause any flagged cheaters to be suddenly confronted by Doom, the game's God of Death, who with one swing of his scythe insta-kills the offending player, resulting in their accounts either being suspended or permanently banned. To see this happening while going about your business in Guild Wars was certainly unexpected and amazing, and a reminder of what cheating might cost you. Number 2. Controller inputs are disabled if you use auto-fire, Metal Gear Solid. Late in the original Metal Gear Solid, Solid Snake is captured by Revolver Ocelot and strapped into an electroshock torture rack, as the player is forced to button mash their way through a series of increasingly difficult sequences intended to test their nimbleness. If you can't button mash hard enough to keep Snake's life bar filled until the timer runs out, then you submit to the torture, resulting in Meryl's death at the end of the game. Before the torture starts though, Ocelot makes a point of telling you, don't even try using auto-fire, I'll know. In the quaint meta-averse gaming era of 1998, it was positively surreal to hear a game's villain break the fourth wall and tell the player that using an unofficial controller with auto-fire capability, in turn completely trivializing button mashing, wouldn't work well for them. And this wasn't merely an empty threat which Hideo Kojima placed in the game to deter cheating. He did indeed have the sequence programmed to recognize auto-fire controllers that were firing above a certain inputs per second rate. If the game recognizes an auto-fire controller, it'll suddenly kill the player's inputs entirely, and even when the torture timer hits 0, the electrocution continues until Snake dies, triggering a game over. You gotta admit, it's a very Hideo Kojima way of getting one over on cheaters, that's for sure. Number 1. Using the Doom cheat codes gives the opposite effect, Heretic. Now, in fairness to id Software, it's clear from their history they're not exactly against cheaters, they just like poking a little fun at them. Case in point, we have Heretic, an authorized Doom clone with a fantasy sheen that was released just a year after Doom, and one which had a surprise in store for anyone who attempted to reuse the legendary FPS's cheat codes. In Doom, entering IDDQD would grant the player God mode, but doing it in Heretic hilariously had the exact opposite effect. You'd instantly drop dead on the spot in a pile of gore. To add insult to injury, a message would appear at the top of the screen that read, "Trying to cheat, huh? Now you die." That's not the only one though. Type in Doom's code to unlock all weapons, ammo, and keys, IDKFA, and you'll lose all weapons and ammo except for your staff, with another taunting message telling you, "Cheater, you don't deserve weapons." To actually activate God mode and unlock all weapons and ammo, you had to seek out different cheat codes specific to Heretic, rather than just expecting to recycle Dooms. If nothing else, this felt like Raven Software was clapping back against people saying that Heretic was just a Doom clone, straight down to not using the same cheat codes.
Even with the likes of Dark Souls, Super Meat Boy, Cuphead, and many more truly difficult video games, apparently, for some, that wasn't enough of a challenge. So let's have a chat. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 genius ways that people beat video games. Number 10. 0 stars, Super Mario 64. Super Mario 64 is one of the most revolutionary games ever made, in part due to the star collectibles that dominate the game. Now, each level has approximately 7 stars, and to progress through Peach's castle, you need to obtain an ever-increasing amount of them. There are 120 stars in total, but you can reach the final level with only 70. However, even though stars are the meat and bones of Super Mario 64, clever speedrunners discovered that it's possible to beat the game without collecting a single one. As it turns out, the classic title has a lot of unintended bugs and glitches, particularly inside Peach's castle, where various corners and doors will cause Mario to clip through and go out of bounds if approached in just the right way. From here, it's just a matter of clipping through each Bowser level to obtain the key necessary to advance through the castle properly, and then you can reach the final level and promptly beat the game without collecting a single star. A lot of time and dedication went into discovering these glitches, and even more time was put into practice to execute them, making something that was once thought of to be impossible into pure reality. Number 9. A literal blind playthrough. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. So here is the tale of Terry Garrett, a blind gamer who lost his sight at 10 years old. But even after this, he wanted to continue the joy that came with playing video games. So in 2011, he set out to beat Ocarina of Time while never looking at the screen. He used 2 speakers situated around him to signal enemies, all the while using the hookshot to learn whether he's facing a wall or not, and save states to preserve progress every time that he messed up. The process was incredibly difficult, and he even said himself that he wanted to give up multiple times. He felt like it wasn't worth it, that he would never ever win. But the community that he built up around him stuck with him and helped him move past multiple points by giving him walkthroughs and videos to listen to. Eventually, after playing the game for 5 years, he finally dealt the last blow to Ganon. Garrett was approaching this game in what many would consider to be the hardest way possible, but he persevered and found clever solutions to playing Zelda and beat it in the process. And he's gone on since to play multiple other games in this style. What an absolute ledge. Number 8. DDR Dance Pad, Bloodborne. In the late 90s, arcades started to find new popularity with an experimental rhythm game that differed from the classic arcade cabinet. And this was Dance Dance Revolution, a game that asked you to dance along with it by following the directions to the beat. Since then, game mats have been created for at-home use, and the game has found life in both arcades and consoles. So of course, people needed to find services for it other than just dancing, clearly. Now, by setting up each direction of the dance pad as a controller, gamers on Twitch and YouTube have been able to play all kinds of titles with it, including one of the hardest ever made, Bloodborne. Now at first, a YouTuber called A Twerking Yoshi, great name there, first beat the Cleric Beast using this rather odd controller, but a year afterwards, a Twitch streamer named Luality attempted the same challenge, but this time with the aim of beating the entire game. Now this sounds extremely difficult, but you know what, she makes it look bloody easy, reaching the last level and making it to the DLC's final boss, Orphan of Kos, with minimal deaths. This fight is already significantly hard by traditional means, but here she is absolutely bossing it out, and thanks to perseverance and a lot of dancing, she was able to take it down. But she even took it further than that and trained her rabbit to try and beat the Cleric Beast, which it did! Number 7. Donkey Kong Bongos, Call of Duty. Donkey Kong Jungle Beats was a very weird game. It came out after Rareware stopped making DK games after being bought out by Microsoft, so Nintendo was once again responsible for creating new entries in the franchise. And what did they come up with? A rhythm game that required a bizarre peripheral to play, the Jungle Beat Bongos, a pair of electronic bongos used to play a variety of Donkey Kong games. Now, while they were initially intended for a few specific titles, people found a lot of other uses for them, with one of the most notable being used to play online games such as Call of Duty Vanguard. A YouTuber named SuperLouis64 used the bongos as a proper controller by modding the game, though not without its limits, such as the fact that he could only shoot, crouch, and slide by hitting a few specific areas of the device. He was able to use the bongos to achieve an unbelievable kill and assist streak of 105. Fair play to you, mate. Number 6. Twitch Chat, Pokemon Red. Do you remember group projects from high school? This is like that, but better. In 2014, an anonymous Australian programmer set up a game of Pokemon Red on a Twitch stream where the chat dictated the actions of the Pokemon trainer. You can type B in the chat and the game pressed B on the controller. You pressed up and the game pressed up, and so on. The stream became an instant hit as people flocked to participate, even if the concurrent 80,000 people playing resulted in difficulty just getting through the game normally. And for a moment, with all of these conflicting inputs, it looked like beating the game would be impossible. Many hours were spent in one area just walking against walls or strolling through a menu infinitely, with many people growing frustrated over the lack of progress. But then, after 16 days of continuous gameplay, Zapdos performed one last Thunder Shock against Blue's Blastoise, and the game was finally beaten. The Twitch stream has become extremely popular ever since and has been done with multiple other games such as Dark Souls and Pokemon Crystal, but the original still stands as the most impressive. A time when gamers worldwide united to become the ultimate Pokemon champion. Number 5. Powered by Potatoes, Doom. If you've gone to any high school science fair, chances are you've seen the classic potato battery, but if you're unaware, the potato has the minerals and metals necessary to generate electrodes that can be used to light a light bulb if wired in a specific way. This experiment has been done many times and helps answer many questions kids have regarding energy, but gamers have discovered a new question that experimentation needed to answer, and that was, how many potatoes does it take to run Doom? This is the question YouTuber Equalo asked himself. But unlike many others, he pursued the drive for knowledge and experimented for the answer. After calculations, he realized that it would require approximately 770 potato pieces to play Doom the traditional way, but after some trial and error, he couldn't execute it properly, and since he had rotting potatoes lining up in his garage, he felt like giving up. But then it hit him. Instead of using a traditional complex computer, why not use a graphic calculator, a device that required much less power? After setting up approximately 200 potato pieces, he hooked it all up to his batteryless calculator and indeed played Doom. Number 4. Lipstick, Counter-Strike. Now this is truly out of the box thinking. Using a makey kit, Twitch streamer Chloe, and I'm going to butcher your surname and I apologize for this, Desmoino, hooked up a control board and some alligator clips to her lipstick, which then connected to the button presses of her PC through USB, creating what she calls Lip Strike. She used this to play Counter-Strike. Now she still used a mouse for various actions, including left click to move, right click to aim, and the scroll wheel to switch weapons, but firing is decided by makeup. It's impressive seeing her use it in action, using automatic weapons and sniper rifles with relative ease as she racks up kills and wins multiple matches over with her setup. And truly it is something that needs to be seen to be believed. Number 3. Bow and Arrow, Overwatch. Twitch streamer Rudesim has won a fair few rodeos playing games with weird controllers. He played Doom with a Guitar Hero guitar and World of Warcraft with a dance pad. But none of this compared to his time with Overwatch. He's played many of the game's heroes with obscure controllers, like D.Va with a joystick and Winston with bananas. But no one stands out as much as playing Hanzo with a Nerf bow. He configured the bow using wires, bolts, and tapes to perform specific actions. Pulling the bow readies Hanzo's bow, and releasing it fires it. Tapping activates quickfire, and touching other parts of it performs the character's further actions. It took him hours to set the whole thing up, and even still, he required a dance pad to be able to move around. As you can imagine, playing the game was very, very difficult, but with a lot of practice, he eventually won a round and even got a double kill. Number 2. 3 games at once, Mega Man X. The speedrunning community has come up with many ways to beat games in the past, but one version of speedrunning totally stands out, and that is tool-assisted speedruns. The idea behind this is that instead of playing the game in real time, it will simply react to a set of predetermined commands. Now, this might sound like cheating at first, but it's completely the opposite, because you can reach levels in gaming that would otherwise be impossible for a human to do. Case in point, Mega Man X. About 10 years ago, YouTuber Aguawaf performed a tool-assisted speedrun where they beat Mega Man X, Mega Man X2, and Mega Man X3 100% simultaneously with the same controller inputs. The amount of time and effort put into this is incredible, as every single input serves some purpose in helping Mega Man reach his goal. A lot of the run depends on loading screens and times where one Mega Man isn't moving while the others continue. There are minimal deaths and only a few hits, and not to mention the entire speedrun was finished in under 1 hour. It might be a tool-assisted speedrun, but it's still one of the most remarkable and most clever ways that somebody has beaten any video game. And number 1, Bananas, Dark Souls 3. Now, topping this list is, as expected, Dark Souls. People have found many ways to beat one of the most challenging games of recent times, including using a rock band guitar, voice commands, toasters, and the most ingenious of all, bananas. Now, you're probably confused when I say that somebody played a game with bananas, and I know what you're probably thinking, that maybe they used the Donkey Kong banana controller from the N64, right? Well, no, this person beat Dark Souls 3 using approximately 9 actual bananas. By plugging in a series of bananas to a power source, YouTuber and Twitch streamer SuperLouis64 could trigger a command by tapping or pressing down on one of the pieces of fruit, whether it's attacking or using the classic Estus flask. After doing this, he proceeded through Dark Souls and streamed the entire game in 2017. He went through everything, including boss fights and some PvP, with some sections being more challenging than others, but he managed to deal the final blow to the soul of Cinder and beat the game with bananas. And later on in 2020, he redid the challenge to prove that the original wasn't a fluke.